There is a scene in the second half of The Amazing World of Gumball, where a character who has been a punchline for half the show's run is standing in a sea of trash, watching a version of his own life flicker past him on a discarded screen, and the camera lingers just long enough that you stop laughing. He is not a monster yet. He is not a villain yet. He is a small, lonely, half-drawn thing in a landfill where forgotten cartoons go to die, and the show keeps cutting back to his face, and his face just keeps slowly understanding what has been done to him. It is one of the most disturbing minutes in a children's cartoon from the last 15 years, and almost nobody talks about it. Tonight on Cortoon, we are going through all of it. So get comfortable, turn the lights down. We are going to be here a while, and if you have not subscribed, it genuinely does help us keep making these. The Amazing World of Gumball has, on the surface, the most permissive premise on television. A blue cat, a goldfish with legs, a half-rabbit, half-cat little sister, a pink mother who is the only adult holding the whole arrangement together, and a father who is, by the show's own admission, not really an adult in any meaningful sense. It is built out of every animation style anyone in the studio could think of. Photographs cut into puppets, claymation, two-dimensional drawings, three-dimensional models, real footage of clouds and pavement and storefronts, all stitched into a single small American town called Elmore. The first season aired in 2011, the last full season finished in 2019. And across those years, the show carried a reputation as one of the cleverest comedies on Cartoon Network. The visual gags, the meta jokes, the music cues, the way characters talk to the audience and to each other and to the writers, that is what almost everyone remembers. What people remember less or pretend they have forgotten is how often this show simply stops being funny for a minute at a time. The way it will set up a perfectly ordinary slapstick beat and then turn the camera in a slightly different direction, until suddenly you are looking at a child realizing she has no one to play with, or a man whose marriage has decayed into a kind of background hum, or a piece of forgotten animation rotting in a digital wasteland, or a family quietly running out of money in a town that does not really exist. The show has been called horror by a certain corner of its fan base, and the strange thing is that the corner is not wrong. Gumball, read carefully, is one of the bleakest pieces of family television that the network ever made. It just dressed itself in such bright colors that nobody had to admit it. So tonight, we are going to walk slowly through the moments where the show let the mask slip. Not the obvious horror, not the screaming penny dragon and the eyeball gags everyone has clipped on the internet for a decade. The quieter, stranger places. The dead child going to high school every morning. The man next door who has been crushed by ordinary disappointment. The infinite checkout line that the show treats as comedy until you notice the camera is not blinking. The episode where Richard's brain physically gets smaller because the family has given up on him. The scene where Gumball and Darwin make a deal not to die without each other and mean it, and then never bring it up again. The void, the censor, the cancelled child, the wedding photograph nobody is allowed to look at. The simulation that knows it's a simulation, that knows you're watching it, that is so tired of being watched that one of the characters actually tries to leave. We are going to take all of this at the slow pace that it deserves. Where the show gives us a date, or a writer, or a confirmed piece of canon, we will say so. Where the fans have built a theory around an image the show only half showed us, we will flag it as a theory and not pretend otherwise. And where the show simply did something quietly cruel and walked away whistling, we will sit with the cruelty for a while, and then move on. Settle in. We begin with the trash. If you have only ever watched Gumball through clips, you may not even know who Rob is. He is not in the marketing. He is not on the box of the figurines. He is not the character anyone draws fan art of when they are introducing their friends to the show. Rob is a thin, awkward, pale yellow creature with a single eye who in his earliest appearances had no name, no voice, and no plot. He simply existed in the background of certain crowd shots, a piece of furniture, a face among the other faces of Elmore. There are stretches of the show where he is on screen for a fraction of a second at a time, and then he is gone again, and nobody, including, apparently, the writers had any particular plan for what he was. Then, in the third season, in an episode called The Void, the camera turns toward him almost by accident. The Void is structured around the idea that there is a place in the universe of the show where rejected scenes and discarded ideas and characters who were thrown away end up. A kind of cosmic editing room floor. a digital landfill. And Rob, in this episode, has fallen into it. Not metaphorically. The Cyclops boy, who was once just a background extra, is now living among broken takes, deleted sequences, half-rendered models, abandoned punchlines, the things the show itself decided it did not want. He wanders through this dump trying to understand what has happened to him, and he watches scenes from his own life play on cracked screens, and what he finds out slowly, in real time, is that he is not really a person at all. He is a collection of bits that the writers did not want to use anymore. He is a side effect of the show's choices. Later in the same season, in the episode called The Nobody, the show finally turns the camera fully toward him for half an hour. And the joke at the center of that episode is not flattering. Rob, the show tells us, was a deliberately uninteresting character, a blank, a non-entity. He was given a backstory that consisted almost entirely of the absence of one. He had no friends, he had no family, he had no signature outfit, he had no quirk, he had nothing. He was a character so empty that he could move through the world unseen. And the episode treats this as a comic premise. The bullying punchline of an episode about being completely overlooked is that he gets overlooked again at the end. He is forgotten before the credits roll. The boys do not remember him by the next episode. He becomes a background character again. The show does not just abandon him in the narrative. The show abandons him as a creative project on screen, in front of you as part of the joke. This is the moment that becomes the engine of one of the bleakest character arcs the show ever attempted. Because when Rob escapes the void, he comes back to Elmore changed. Half of his body is melted and rendered as if some compositing layer has corrupted itself. He has memories Gumball and Darwin do not. He knows that they are in a show. He knows that he was forgotten. And from that moment onward, every appearance he makes is laced with this quiet, very specific anger. The anger of an extra who has worked out that he is an extra. He plots petty revenges against Gumball. He tries to become the central character. He attempts to ruin the friendship at the center of the show. He fails at all of this because in the universe of the show, he is still nobody. And the show knows it. And he knows it. And we know it. And the joke is that the only person who does not know it is the one for whom it would matter most. The reason Rob matters, in a conversation about the darkest moments of Gumball, is that he is the closest thing the show has to a self-portrait of its own cruelty. Cartoons are full of background characters who never get a name. We all grew up watching crowds of strangers in animated towns, and we all just took for granted that those crowds did not have inner lives, that the bus driver did not have hopes, that the kid in the second row did not have a family at home. Gumball, in Rob, takes that assumption and weaponizes it. It points at a member of the crowd and says, what if he did have an inner life? What if he sat at home at night knowing that he had been written badly? What if he could see your face through the screen? And what if he hated you, just a little, for never having noticed him before? It is a horror story about the way storytelling works. It is the show admitting, on the record, that there is collateral damage in every cartoon, that the writer's room is full of decisions, that those decisions throw characters away, that the discarded ones do not stop existing. They just stop being filmed. The void, by the show's own logic, is full of these people. We only see Rob because he is angry enough to climb back out. One detail in the void sequence becomes more upsetting the longer you sit with it. While Rob is wandering through the landfill, you can see, in the background, fragments of other rejected ideas, drawings of characters that were never used, half-formed concepts, broken design sketches. Some of those background fragments, by most accounts, are real. The show is said to have recycled actual artwork from its own development process. Things that were drawn, considered, and cut. The void is, on this reading, in Parday's literal museum of the show's own discarded decisions, displayed on screen as a warning. This is what we did not use. This is where the unused things go. You cannot watch this on a quiet night and not feel something cold at the edge of it. When the show went off the air in 2019, with the episode called The Inquisition, Rob's arc was not finished. He was still out there, still angry, still aware of how the cartoon worked, and the show simply stopped. He never got resolution. He never got an apology. The boys never went and pulled him out of his sadness. The last we saw of him, in the original run's canon, he was still a fragment. He's still down there by every reasonable reading of what the show gave us, sitting in the dump. And we move on. There is a particular kind of unease that runs through any episode of Gumball. that takes Carrie seriously, and most viewers, especially first-time viewers, do not catch it for years. Carrie Kruger is a ghost. The show's open about this. She is gray, she is translucent, she floats more than she walks, she possesses people, she eats their food through their bodies, she haunts. The first thing we ever learn about her, properly, is that she is dead. The show treats this as a comic premise. She is a goth high school girl who happens to be incorporeal. It is the kind of joke a sketch show would do. Then, slowly, across multiple episodes, the show drips in the actual facts of her existence. And the actual facts of her existence are the kind of thing a sketch show would never touch. We are introduced to her parents eventually. Her father is a translucent ghost, like she is. Her mother is also a ghost. They live, if that is the word, in a haunted house. They have been ghosts for a long time. Carrie, by every reasonable reading of what the show has shown us, is a dead child, not a metaphorical dead child, not a girl with a goth aesthetic. She is the spirit of a person who used to be alive and is now not. And she's been going to school every day, sitting next to the other children, raising her hand, doing assignments, attending field trips, going through every step of an ordinary teenage life in a body that does not have weight. Once you notice this, you cannot unnotice it. Every scene Carrie is in becomes uncanny. She sits in a classroom of living children and answers a teacher's question. She has a crush on Darwin, she dates Darwin. She and Darwin go on outings together. She, a ghost, the disembodied spirit of a girl who died at some unstated age, is in a relationship with a goldfish who grew legs. The show plays this entirely straight. It is a real relationship with real feelings with real arguments. It is one of the more touching arcs in the show's middle seasons. And the entire foundation of it is that one of the two people in the relationship is dead. The show only occasionally pulls at this thread. There is an episode involving food where Carrie's inability to taste anything corporeal becomes a plot point. There is one involving possession, in which we see what her existence actually feels like from inside her own head. Then, there is an exchange where her father gives Darwin the kind of fatherly warning a normal father might give to a daughter's boyfriend, except that the father is a ghost and the daughter is a ghost, and Darwin will eventually grow old and die and they will not. None of these episodes flag the strangeness for the viewer. The show simply assumes you have made peace with the fact that one of the recurring characters is dead, and proceeds. The interesting part, the part nobody ever talks about, is that Carrie does not seem to remember being alive. She is not haunted by a specific death. She is not mourning a life. She is simply a girl who is also a ghost in a school full of impossible creatures, in a town where the rules of reality are very generous. Read one way. That is comforting. Read another. It is the bleakest thing the show ever did. Because if Carrie does not remember being alive, then she has no concept of what she lost. She will spend the rest of her time on the show forming friendships and relationships with characters whose lifespans will inevitably end, and she will watch all of them go, and she will still be in that classroom, in some incarnation of Elmore, after Darwin is gone, after Gumball is gone, after the show itself is gone. She is, by the show's own logic, the character who will outlast everyone. In one of the Halloween episodes, this is foregrounded just for a second. Carrie is asked, in passing, what it is like to be what she is. And the show throws the answer away as a joke. But the joke is built on a real piece of metaphysics. She does not get older. She does not get tired. She does not need to sleep, although she does anyway, in a coffin in a house that is not on any of the maps of the town. The Kruger surname is a horror reference. The animators know exactly what they have done. The character design is deliberately reminiscent of a particular tradition of Saturday morning Monster Girl, but the show takes the design seriously rather than mocking it. And what you end up with is one of the gentlest, sweetest depictions of a dead person in all of children's television, played as if there is nothing strange about it at all. The dark moment everyone misses is that Carrie's arc, taken on its own terms, is the story of a child whose afterlife is a continuation of the dailiness of her former life, and the show never lets her question whether that is enough. She does not get to ask why she has to keep going to high school. She does not get to ask why her parents are still her parents. She does not get to ask why the rest of the world treats her as still functionally a teenager. She never sits at the edge of her bed at night and wonders what she actually is. She is treated, by the writers and by the other characters, as simply Carrie, and the absence of any introspection from her about her own state becomes The longer you watch, a quiet kind of horror. The show could have done a deeply existential teenage ghost. Other shows have. Gumball instead chose to do a teenage ghost who has stopped asking questions. That is a choice. That is, in its own way, the harder choice. It is also the lonelier one. There is another character whose dark moments tend to slip past viewers entirely. Partly because the show frames him as a joke, and partly because the joke is funny. Gaylord Robinson, the neighbor, is a fat, green, mustachioed man who lives next door to the Wattersons. He is in some sense the children's television presenter version of an entertainer, a sort of warm uncle figure. And the running gag of the show is that this is purely a public face. In private, in his own house, Mr. Robinson is one of the most miserable adults ever animated for children. He has a wife he does not love. He has a son in his 30s who still lives at home. He has neighbors, the Wattersons, who routinely ruin his belongings, terrorize his lawn, and make his life worse in dozens of small, specific ways. He is, in nearly every episode he appears in some stage of either rage or despair, and the show plays it for comedy. There is, however, an episode in the 3rd season called The Joy that pulls the curtain back on what the show is actually doing with him. It is the rare episode where the show pauses on Mr. Robinson long enough to admit that something is genuinely wrong. He is not just irritable, he is depressed. He has been depressed for a very long time. His marriage is functionally over. His career, what is left of it, sustains him in the way a habit sustains a person. He is going through the motions. Without spoiling the structure of the episode, what it does is take a perky cartoon convention, the idea that joy is contagious, and weaponize it against the very specific texture of adult midlife unhappiness. Mr. Robinson does not want joy. He wants to be left alone with his disappointment. The show, very gently, allows him this. This becomes harder to watch when you start cataloging his other appearances. There is an episode in which his marriage briefly threatens to fall apart because of something Gumball and Darwin have done, and the show spends a notable amount of screen time on his face while he absorbs what is happening. Elsewhere, his front lawn is destroyed and he simply sits down on it, surrounded by ruin. And the camera does not move for long enough that the laugh dies in your throat. There is a moment when his secret hobby is exposed. And the hobby, when you see it, is not the absurd cartoon hobby you were expecting. It is a small, sad, slightly embarrassing thing that a real man might do alone in a real garage. The show keeps cutting back to these moments and asking you very quietly what kind of joke this is supposed to be. The argument the show is making, read this way, is that adulthood in Elmore is not glamorous. The grown-ups in this universe are not running the place. They are surviving it. Mr. Robinson is the clearest single embodiment of that argument, but it is not just him. Principal Brown is a man who has spent his entire life inside a school he never escaped. Coach is a perpetually shouting body whose entire identity is the volume at which she screams. Larry, the most overworked man in the town, holds down a job at every business in Elmore, at the same time because the system has decided he should. And across the run of the show we are shown him losing his mind in slow motion, and the show treats this loss as a recurring punchline. Larry, taken seriously, is a man whose existence has been reduced to labor. There is no version of Larry that is allowed to rest. The town runs on him, and the show knows it. In one of the later seasons, Larry, having finally been told he can take a break, immediately falls apart because his entire personality is now made of being needed. He does not know who he is when nobody is asking him for change at a till. That is a joke. It is also a real diagnosis. The show is telling you, in the gentlest possible way, that there are people who become so wedged into their roles that they cannot exist without them, and that the wedging is not their fault, it is the way the place was built. Elmore eats its adults. The children get to be the show. The adults get to be the scenery, and when the scenery cracks open, what you see inside is not very nice. The dark moment, then, with all of these adults, is not any single scene. It is the cumulative effect of watching them over 6 seasons. You start to notice that the show keeps quietly returning to the same idea. The grown-ups in this world are tired. They are bored. They are stuck. They had dreams. The show never tells you what the dreams were. It just lets you see, around the edges of every adult character, the shape of a life that did not work out. And then it cuts back to Gumball and Darwin, doing something stupid, eating chocolate, learning a small lesson, and the camera moves on, and you are left with the residue. This is a strange thing for a children's cartoon to be doing. It is also one of the reasons the show became a critical favorite in its run. The argument was always that Gumball was smarter than it looked. What people sometimes mean by that, but do not always say out loud, is that the show was sadder than it looked. There is a recurring set of details in the Amazing World of Gumball that are easy to file as cartoon nonsense and even easier on a second watch to recognize a very specific portrait of a family scraping by. The Wattersons are poor. The show never says it loudly, and it never makes it the central trauma of any one episode. But it is woven through the running fabric of the show so consistently that once you start noticing, you cannot really stop. The house is mortgaged. There is a recurring joke about the family losing the house, or nearly losing the house. Nicole, the mother, works a job at a rainbow factory that the show portrays as soul-crushing, repetitive, and beneath her. Richard, the father, is unemployed for most of the run of the show, and in the rare episodes where he does briefly hold a job, that job is presented as either degrading, hopeless, or both. The car they drive is falling apart. The fridge is sometimes empty. The kids notice. The kids notice in the way that real children notice these things, which is sideways, in passing, without being able to name what they are noticing. Look at the episode called The Check, in which Richard receives a paycheck for the first time in years, and decides that this means he has unlimited money. He spends the entire thing in an afternoon. The episode is a comedy. The joke is that Richard does not understand how money works. The harder reality underneath the joke is that the family is so far from any sense of financial security that the arrival of even one paycheck triggers a kind of euphoric collapse. The family overspends because they have never had spare anything, and now suddenly they have a tiny excess of something, and they cannot handle it. This is not a joke a sitcom would make about a middle-class family. This is a joke that comes from a very specific economic position. The show knows what it is doing. Or, take the episode called The Money, in which the family's reputation has so degraded that nobody in the town will give them credit, and the episode is again played as a comedy, with Gumball convincing the town that he and his family are wealthy by performing the rituals of wealth. The bleak detail under the comedy is that the show takes for granted that the Wattersons have a reputation as the local low-income family, that this reputation is well known, and that the entire town treats them accordingly. When the town finds out the truth, the town does not become kinder. The town turns on them. The episode resolves itself, but it leaves a residue. The Wattersons are at the bottom of the local economy. Everyone knows. Nobody's going to help them. Then there is the episode in which Nicole, who was the highest functioning member of the household by an enormous margin, is forced to confront the truth about her own life. She is the only adult in the family. She is doing everything. She holds down the job, she handles the bills, she manages the children, she manages her husband, who functions, in many episodes, as a kind of fourth child. The show is sometimes accused of being cruel to Richard, of treating his stupidity as a punchline, of mocking him relentlessly. The accusation misses the point. The show is not mocking Richard. The show is sitting with the fact that Nicole has effectively married a man who never grew up, and is now spending her entire adult life carrying the weight of that decision, alongside the weight of 3 children, in a house that is one bad month away from foreclosure. The moment that crystallizes this is in the episode called The Choices, where we see a flashback to a version of Nicole's life in which she made different decisions. We see a version of her that is calm, accomplished, professional. We see what her life could have been. The show does not present this as a tragedy. It presents it as an observation. This is what Nicole gave up. This is what was traded away for the family we see in front of us every week. The show does not say that the trade was bad. It just lets us see what the trade cost. And then it goes back to the regular plot. And the regular plot involves Richard eating an entire couch, or Gumball getting his head stuck in a piano, or some other comic absurdity. And you are sitting at home watching this and you are remembering the flashback. The argument that the show is making, the argument that no other Cartoon Network show of the same era was making with the same patience, is that the family at the center of the cartoon is, in real economic terms, struggling. And that the comedy that the family produces every week is partially produced by that struggle. Without the struggle, the show would not be funny. The poverty is the engine. The fragility is the engine. When the Wattersons start the day already contains the possibility that everything will fall apart by dinner. That is what makes Gumball's small disasters land. He is not a rich kid breaking expensive things for a punchline. He is a poor kid breaking the only things he has. There is a Christmas episode in which the family tries to have a normal holiday, and the holiday is destroyed in a series of escalating small calamities, and at the end, the family sits in their ruined house, surrounded by ruined gifts, and decides that this is fine because they have each other. This is, on the surface, a heartwarming Christmas ending. It is also, when you look at it closely, the only kind of Christmas ending a family in this financial position can have. There is no money left to fix anything. There is no replacement gift waiting. There is just the family, in the ruins, choosing to be alright with it, because the alternative is to admit that the holiday was crushed by their circumstances. The show, taken all at once, is not subtle about this. The Wattersons live in a particular kind of American precarity, and the show is generous enough to let them be funny and warm and silly inside that precarity, but it does not pretend that the precarity is not there. The longer you watch, the more you understand that every episode in which they are about to lose something is not a sitcom plot mechanism. It is a portrait of a family who genuinely could lose something at any moment, and who have learned to laugh about it because laughing is one of the few resources they actually have. Anais Watterson, 4 years old at the start of the show, may be the loneliest character in television's last 15 years, and almost nobody talks about that either. The premise is that she is a genius. She is the smartest member of her family by an enormous margin. She is 2 grades ahead at school. She does her own taxes. She manages the household paperwork when her mother is overworked. She has the vocabulary, the reasoning skills, and the long-term planning capacity of a fully grown adult. And she is encased in the body of a 4-year-old half-rabbit. The show treats this as comic. The implication, which the show only occasionally allows itself to surface, is that there is no one in her life who can talk to her at her level. Her parents do not understand her. Her father is, by every reasonable reading, intellectually limited in a fairly serious way, and the show is consistent about this. He cannot follow her arguments. He cannot follow most arguments. Her mother understands her better, but is too overwhelmed by everything else in the household to give her the kind of intellectual partnership Anais would need. Her brothers are her brothers. Gumball is a chaotic, distractible, older brother. Darwin is a sweet, but emotionally simple, older brother. Neither of them are equipped to be Anais's confidants on anything that actually matters to her. She has no peers at school because she is too young for the older kids and too smart for the kids her own age. She is, in the practical sense, alone in her own house, in her own school, in her own town. The episode that surfaces this most clearly is the one called The Pony, in which Anais has been longing for a particular toy for a long time, a stuffed donkey character from a children's television show that she watches obsessively. Her family does not understand why she loves the show. Her family teases her about it. The show, within the show, Daisy the Donkey, is the only piece of culture available to her that's pitched at someone her own age, and she clings to it because it is the only thing in her life that treats her as a 4-year-old. The bleak observation underneath the comedy of the episode is that Anais is using a children's show as a substitute for the childhood her own intelligence has stolen from her. She cannot be a normal child because she is too smart. She cannot be a normal adult because she is too small. The Daisy the Donkey show is the narrow slice of personhood she has left. There are other moments. There is an episode in which Anais wins a science fair, and her victory is treated as a punchline rather than a triumph. There is one in which she has, for a brief period, friends her own age, and the show makes very clear that this is the only time in her life she's experienced any social ease with other children. There is a moment when her parents finally try to take her seriously, and the attempt collapses, because it is so far outside their normal mode that they cannot sustain it. And there is one when she breaks down, for a single moment, and asks why she has to be the way she is. And the show does not give her an answer because there is not an answer. Anais, taken as a whole character, is a portrait of childhood gifted alienation, done at a level of consistency that even adult prestige television rarely manages. She is the child whose adulthood arrived early, who cannot enjoy her childhood because she has already exceeded it, and who is now suspended in this very narrow space where she is too much for the world around her, and not enough for herself. The dark moment with Anais is not any single scene. It is the accumulation of a life lived alone in a crowded house. The family loves her. The family does not understand her. Those two facts are not the same fact. The show gently lets the gap between them stay open. There is also the question of what Anais will become, and the show does, in a small handful of episodes, give us hints. There is a sequence set in the future in which we see grown-up versions of all the Watterson children, and the grown-up Anais is, depending on which version of the future the show is showing us, either a high-powered professional, a researcher, a recluse, or someone whose intellectual gift has finally been allowed to express itself in a meaningful career. None of those futures look quite happy. None of them look like the futures of someone who got to be a child first. The show suggests, without ever quite saying it, that the cost of being Anais is that the rest of her life will be a kind of catch-up, and that she may never quite be a person whose age and capacity line up. That is the thing that the show is willing to look at for a moment, and then it cuts away, and Anais has another smart line, and Gumball and Darwin do another silly thing, and the camera moves on. There is an episode in the run of The Amazing World of Gumball called The Finale, which is one of the most quietly catastrophic things any children's show has ever aired, and which functions, depending on how you read it, as either a meta-joke, a confession, or a piece of accidental philosophy. The premise of the episode is straightforward. The Wattersons have realized that almost every problem they have ever caused is finally about to catch up with them at once. Every neighbor they wronged, every object they broke, every consequence they slipped past. All of it is coming for them simultaneously. So the family loads themselves into the car and goes around the town for half an hour, ticking off old offenses, apologizing, paying old debts, returning old objects, settling old scores, in a kind of frantic montage of accountability. By the end of the episode, they have paid for everything. They have settled with everyone. They are free. The bleak detail is what this does to the world around them. In returning everything, in undoing everything, they are also undoing the show. The town empties out. Old characters disappear, because the relationship that gave them their place in the town is now dissolved. The premise of the show, that this family causes chaos and somehow always lands on its feet, is taken apart on screen. The episode ends with the family realizing that, with every problem they have ever caused now resolved, the show no longer has a reason to exist. They look at one another, in a quiet street, in an empty town, and they recognize this. The show, briefly, ends. The credits start to roll. That alone would be one of the strangest endings in the history of Cartoon Network. What makes it stranger is what happens next. The credits do not finish. The family decides that they do not want the show to be over. They decide to undo the resolutions. They cause new problems. They break new things. They wrong new people. They restart the engine of the show by deliberately committing fresh chaos, so that the show has a reason to keep being made. The episode plays this as a comedy. The implication that the episode is playing with, but never quite saying out loud, is that the family knows the show exists, and is willing to behave badly to keep it on the air. If you read the finale this way, it is not just a clever episode. It is a confession. The chaos that the Wattersons cause every week is not just the natural behavior of an unruly family. It is the maintenance of the cartoon they are inside. They have to keep breaking things to stay broadcast. Without the chaos, there is no show. Without the show, there is no them. The family is, in this reading, dimly aware that they exist for our entertainment, and the cost of their continued existence is the continued production of suffering for the people around them. That is a very dark idea to put inside a Cartoon Network comedy. It is also the foundation of every meta-theory the show would go on to develop over the next several seasons. By the later seasons, the show has accepted this premise more or less explicitly. The episode called The Disaster takes the meta-logic of the finale and pushes it to a literal extreme. The episode called The Rerun travels in time within the show's own canon. The void itself, as we have already discussed, takes us into the cosmic garbage pile of the show's own cut footage. The show, by this point, is no longer pretending that it does not know it is a cartoon, and the characters, slowly, are no longer pretending that they do not know they are inside one. The viewer is being trained, episode by episode, to read the entire run as a kind of haunted production diary. This is where the discussion of Gumball's darkness has to widen out beyond character beats and into the structural choices the show keeps making. Because the more meta the show gets, the more cruel the meta turns out to be. The Wattersons did not ask to be cartoons. The supporting characters did not ask to be supporting characters. The discarded extras did not ask to be discarded. And the show, in its later seasons, becomes more and more interested in dwelling on what it has done to the people inside it. It is, in this sense, a show that is slowly turning its own conscience on itself in front of you while continuing to be funny. The Inquisition is the episode where this conscience finally collides with a wall. The Inquisition aired in 2019 as the last episode of the 6th and final season. It was not advertised as a finale. There was no promotion treating it as the end of the show. It was simply an episode about a character called the Inquisitor, an outside force brought into the school to enforce a set of strict rules on the students of Elmore. The Inquisitor, in the show's own logic, is a kind of censor figure, a humorless authority obsessed with eliminating any behavior that does not conform to a narrow standard. The students of the school, led by Gumball and Darwin, begin to rebel. The rebellion grows. The town starts to push back. The episode is shaped like a setup for a much larger story. And then it ends. There is no resolution. The Inquisitor is not defeated. The rebellion is not consummated. The episode ends mid-arc, with the boys having made a stand but not having won, with the world of the show on the brink of a much bigger conflict than the show normally allows itself. And then the credits roll, and the show, for years afterwards, simply stops being made. There is no next episode. There is no resolution to the rebellion. The last image of the show, for several years, is a town in a state of escalating revolt against an outside enforcement figure, and the cartoon simply walks off the air. It is impossible to overstate how strange it felt at the time to watch the show end this way. Most cartoons that go off the air softly. They get a finale. They get a wedding episode. They get a graduation. They get a sequence of farewells. Gumball got a cliffhanger about an authoritarian figure attempting to silence the free expression of children. A cliffhanger that read, depending on how cynically you wanted to read it, as a quiet shot at the network that had decided to stop ordering new episodes. Read this way. The Inquisition becomes one of the angriest endings a cartoon has ever had. The show, on its way out the door, made an episode about an outside authority arriving to flatten the unique voice of the place we have spent 6 years getting to know. The show then made the family it had built fight back. The show then aired the fight without an ending, and went silent. There are fans who will argue with some plausibility that the show always intended this to be the setup for a return, that the cliffhanger was always meant to be picked up later. There are interviews from people involved with the show suggesting that the team intended to come back to it, and eventually a movie and continuation were announced with plans for new material that would resume the story. But for several years, the only available reading of the show's ending was the one that the show itself had broadcast. The last thing the Amazing World of Gumball had to say to the world was a story about a town fighting a censor that could not be defeated within the time the show had left. That is a dark final image for a cartoon ostensibly aimed at children, and it is not an accident. The show knew what it was doing. When the conversation about the future of Elmore eventually resumes, with the announced continuation, what happens to that cliffhanger is going to determine, in part, what the show is now remembered as. If the rebellion is picked up and resolved, then the Inquisition becomes a cliffhanger like any other, a setup for a payoff that arrived eventually. If the new material chooses to skip past the rebellion, or quietly retire it, then the Inquisition remains the ending it appeared to be, and the show retains its strange, sad, unresolved final note. Nothing officially confirmed at the time of writing tells us which way that question will land. The honest answer is that we do not yet know. The honest reading of what has aired so far is that the show ended on the most uneasy possible image of the town it had built, and that is one of the darkest endings any Cartoon Network show of the last decade has been allowed to have. There is another episode, deeper in the run, that is one of the most genuinely upsetting things the show ever attempted, and that very few clip compilation videos ever go near, because it cannot be excerpted. It is called The Limit. The premise is the kind of premise that would be a single sketch in any other show. Nicole has gone to the supermarket and is trying to use a coupon. The cashier refuses to honor the coupon. Nicole decides she will not leave until the coupon is honored. The standoff escalates. The episode follows the escalation in real time. Nicole becomes the entire focus of the supermarket, then the entire focus of the town, then the entire focus of forces that should not be involved in a coupon dispute. And the episode keeps going and going, and the comedy keeps grinding harder against something that is not really comedy at all. What the limit is actually about, taken seriously, is the rage of a woman who has been worn down by 1,000 small administrative defeats and who has decided in this one moment, in this one supermarket, that she will not be worn down by one more. She is not really fighting the cashier. She is fighting the entire architecture of small humiliations that has been wearing her out for years. She is fighting the bills, the bank, the husband, the household, the rainbow factory, the boss, the children, the school, the town. She is, in a single coupon dispute, trying to take a stand against the cumulative attrition of her own life. The cashier, who is a faceless line cook style character, becomes the temporary representative of every system that has ever ground her down. The reason the episode is upsetting, rather than funny, is that the show lets her not win. The show could easily, in its normal mode, have given Nicole a triumphant victory in which the cashier is humiliated and the system is briefly justly arranged. The show declines to do this. The episode resolves in a way that suggests the standoff was, in some real sense, futile. Nicole has spent her last reserves of will on a coupon. The coupon is not worth what she spent. She knows it. She has to go home anyway. The episode plays the resolution as comic, but the comic frame does not really survive the weight of what we have just watched. The limit, taken alongside the joy and other quiet, adult-focused episodes, is part of a small but consistent body of work inside Gumball that is, openly, about the texture of being an adult who is not winning. The show keeps coming back to this. It does not punish the adults for losing. It does not even ask them to win. It just sits with them in the moments when their losses are most visible, and then it lets them keep going, because keeping going is what adults do, because the children need them to keep going. Because if Nicole sat down on the floor of that supermarket and refused to get up, the entire household would collapse in 2 days. There is an episode called The Vegging, which is one of the strangest single half hours the show ever produced, and which sits in this particular conversation because of how unflinching it is about what is actually happening to Richard. The episode begins with Richard, who is, as established, an unemployed, full-grown man with the impulse control of a toddler, deciding that he wants to spend a perfect day doing nothing. He has dreamed of this day. He has prepared for this day. The day will involve junk food and a recliner, and a long sequence of mindless television. And that is the whole of it. The rest of the family, by various means, attempts to interrupt the day. Richard, with surprising determination, defends the day. The episode follows him through the elaborate measures he takes to prevent any kind of effort, mental or physical, from reaching him. The bleak thing the episode then does is animate, on screen, the consequences of what Richard is doing to himself. His brain, the actual organ inside his head, begins to shrink. The show literalizes the decay. We see, in cutaway shots, his brain reducing in size, getting smaller and smaller, until by the end of the day there is barely anything inside his skull at all. He has, in the course of a single afternoon of deliberate intellectual inactivity, regressed to a kind of functional infancy. He can no longer form sentences. He can no longer recognize his own family. He has had the perfect day he wanted, and the cost of having it was that he no longer exists as a person. The show plays this for comedy. The comedy is real, the gags land, the structure works. The dark reading underneath the comedy is that Richard, in every other episode of the show, is one bad day away from this. The show is telling us, in a single dramatic, compressed instance, what would happen to Richard if he were left entirely alone. He would simply stop being a person. He is sustained as a person by the friction of being interrupted constantly by his family. The family is the reason he has not already become whatever this episode shows us he could become. The episode is not just a punchline about a lazy dad. It is the show admitting in animation that Richard is being held together by the people around him, and that without them, he would dissolve. That reading becomes especially heavy when you remember that the rest of the show has been quietly establishing how much work it takes Nicole to keep Richard functional. There are episodes where she has to be elsewhere for a day, and the household immediately tips into crisis, and Richard is the center of the crisis. There are episodes where she briefly resents him, There are episodes where she reaches a kind of exhausted understanding that this is the man she chose, and that loving him is not the same as being unburdened by him. The vegging, taken in this context, is not a one-off comic exaggeration. It is a portrait of what Nicole is, in fact, dealing with, week after week, year after year. The brain shrinks. She is the only thing preventing it. She is tired. There is a smaller, gentler set of dark moments concerning Hector Jotunheim, the very large blue character who appears across the show's run as a kind of gentle giant friend of the boys. He is the size of a building. He is in a school class with much smaller children. He has the emotional development of a young child and a singular sweetness about him that the show treats with real tenderness. The dark thing about Hector is that the show is open about what he is, and what he is dangerous. His mother is, by the show's own depiction, a witch. His size and strength are unstable. He must be kept calm, or, by the show's logic, he loses control of himself and becomes a force of destruction the town cannot withstand. There is an episode where Hector does, in fact, lose control. The episode does not soft pedal what happens. Hector becomes enormous, becomes monstrous, becomes incapable of recognizing the people who love him, and almost flattens the town. The episode resolves with him being restored, eventually, but the resolution does not undo the fear of what he became. The kindest character in the school, the one whose entire emotional register is sweetness, is also, by the show's own rules, the most dangerous force in the local population. He carries this duality every day. He does not get to set it down. He's a child trying to be good in a body that is one bad afternoon away from killing everyone he loves. The show is, in its quiet way, telling a story here about disability, about the management of a body that does not behave the way other bodies behave, about the responsibility of caring for someone whose own body is the source of the danger. It does not say any of this loudly. It just keeps coming back to a Hector and letting him be sweet, and letting the threat hover at the edge of the frame, and letting his mother, who is a complicated character in her own right, occupy a space somewhere between caretaker and warden. The dark moment, with Hector, is the cumulative awareness that he is permanently in this position, and that the town has not really come to terms with it, and that the show is not promising him a future in which he is ever fully safe. We have to talk also about Penny, because the famous reveal in the 3rd season episode called "The Shell" is one of the most surprising images the show ever delivered, and it has been clipped to death online, and the online clips usually present it without its emotional context. Penny, the peanut girl who is Gumball's love interest, has been depicted for the first 2.5 seasons of the show as a small peanut-shaped person with antlers wearing a yellow shell. In the episode called "The Shell," Gumball convinces her to take off the shell. The shell, it turns out, is not clothing. It is the outer layer she has been required by her family, by her culture, by her own anxiety to wear in public. Without it, she is something else entirely. She is a shifting, fluid creature whose form responds to her emotions, who can become a fairy, who can become a dragon, who can become a monster, depending on what she is feeling at that moment. The clips online tend to focus on the dragon. The dragon is visually striking. The dragon roars. The dragon is the thing people put on lists of cartoon characters who get scary. The thing the clips usually skip is what the show is doing with the reveal. Penny is not simply revealed to be a monster. She is revealed to be something she has spent her entire life being told to hide. Her father, in particular, is shown as having insisted she keep the shell on. Her family has reinforced this for years. The shell is not a costume. It is the architecture of her self-repression, and the reveal that comes when Gumball encourages her to remove it is not a horror beat, it is a love story beat. The implication is that Gumball is the first person in her life who has wanted to see her as she actually is. The dark moment, with Penny, is what the existence of the shell implies about the rest of her life. She has spent every day of her conscious existence inside that shell. She has had to manage her emotions in public, so that her form remains stable. Her parents, particularly her father, have been the enforcers of this management. The peanut-shaped girl with the antlers, the version of Penny that the show spent 2 seasons presenting as her, is a piece of suppression. The reveal is also a diagnosis. This is a child who has been forced to suppress her own nature for the comfort of the adults around her, and the show is openly siding with her against the suppression. What is darker still, if you keep watching, is that the show does not entirely let her out of the suppression after the reveal. She is more often, after the shell, depicted in her shifting form, but there are still episodes in which she puts the shell back on, sometimes for plot reasons, sometimes because of her family, sometimes because the situation demands it. The shell is a thing she can wear or not wear. It is a thing she has to make a decision about on some level every time she enters a room. The version of Penny we see, week to week, is the result of a continual negotiation with the world about how visible she is allowed to be. That is the underside of what looked, on first watch, like a triumphant transformation episode. The triumph was real, and it was also partial, and the show was honest enough to keep showing both halves of it. Then there is the harder, more uncomfortable question of what happens to the voice actors of children's cartoons, and why it matters in the case of this show in particular. Across the run of The Amazing World of Gumball, the voice of Gumball himself was performed by more than one actor. Logan Grove voiced the character in the early seasons. As his voice changed, Jacob Hopkins took over. As that voice changed in turn, Nicholas Cantu took over. And by the closing stretch of the show, another performer had stepped in. Darwin's voice was similarly replaced more than once. The show is consistent in its acknowledgement of these changes. The voice actors are credited. The transitions are visible in the seasons. The reason this is relevant in a conversation about the dark moments of the show is that it is one of the most quietly humane production realities of any long-running animated series, and the show, in its meta moments, sometimes acknowledges it. There are moments in the later seasons where Gumball's voice will crack midline, where the show will note that his voice sounds different, where the character will himself acknowledge that he sounds like a different person. The show is not pretending that the actor change is not happening. The show is, in its own way, sitting with the inescapable fact of puberty in a way that very few animated children's shows have been willing to do. The boys are growing up. The actors are growing up. The voices are changing. The cartoon, which would in any other show be a kind of frozen amber preserving the children at the same age forever, is here treated as an artifact subject to time. The dark version of this reading is that the show is openly aware that the children inside it are aging, while the world they live in is supposed to remain static. Every season of the show represents another year, or near enough, of the lives of the actual children performing it. The cartoon kids, in their cartoon world, are supposed to be the same age throughout, but you can hear, if you listen carefully, that they are not. The voices get deeper. The actors mature. The show, knowing this, makes the choice to keep recasting rather than pretend. That is a choice. It is also a confession. It is an admission that the production cannot prevent the boys from growing up, and that the only way to honor the fiction is to allow the fiction to be visibly worn by the people performing it. This is a strange and sad thing to find inside a comedy cartoon. It is also one of the reasons the show feels, in retrospect, like a single long piece of work, rather than a series of disposable episodes. The voices change. The animation styles deepen. The themes complicate. The show grows up alongside its actors. And when the show ends with the Inquisition on a cliffhanger, there is the additional sadness that the cast that performed those final episodes are themselves now older than the characters they played, and that whatever continuation the show eventually receives will have to make decisions about whether to recast again, or to age the characters, or to acknowledge that the time that has passed in our world has passed in theirs as well. There is no clean way to answer that question. There is no way to put the actors back in the bodies they had when the show began. The show is a record of a particular set of voices at a particular age, and that record is now closed. There is an episode called The Nightmare, and it is one of the most direct horror gestures the show ever made, and the strange thing about it is how undeservedly it is mostly remembered as a single image. The single image that the internet has fixed on is a creature, sometimes described as the personification of sleep within the show, that is depicted in deliberately unsettling proportions, with eyes that do not quite work as eyes should, and which is, in the logic of the episode, the consequence of not going to sleep. The image is genuinely scary by the standards of children's animation, but the episode around the image is doing something much more interesting than just deploying a scary character. The episode is about Gumball, and Darwin refusing to sleep because sleep is, they decide, a waste of time. They cannot afford to lose hours of consciousness every night. So they take the resources of their entire household to keep themselves awake. They drink caffeine. They invent contraptions. They run themselves into hallucinations. And the figure that arrives is summoned by their refusal. The figure is not really a monster. The figure is the consequence of their refusal to do something their bodies require. The figure is, more or less openly, a personification of sleep deprivation. This is the layer that the meme imagery flattens. The episode is not just deploying a creepy character, it is making a sustained, weirdly serious argument about the necessity of sleep, the danger of trying to escape it, and the slow disintegration of the mind that occurs when sleep is refused for too long. The boys, by the end, are no longer themselves. They are saying things they did not mean. They are reacting to things that are not there. The figure is not, in the strictest sense, attacking them. The figure is what they become when they have not slept. The horror is being looked at, not invading them. The dark moment in the nightmare is the final shot, in which the boys finally surrender to sleep, and we are shown what the world of the show looks like when its protagonists are unconscious. The figure moves through the empty rooms. The other members of the family sleep too, all of them visible, vulnerable, undefended. The implication, gently, is that this is what happens every night. Every night the family is unconscious, and the figure, or something like it, is present. The world is not paused while we sleep. There are things in it that we do not get to see, because we are not awake to see them. It is a small piece of metaphysics dressed up as a Halloween episode, and it is one of the more memorable images the show ever produced. The sorcerer is a different kind of dark, and the dark is the existential, not the horror, register. The Sorcerer is an episode about Anais' loneliness, which we have already discussed, and about her brief willingness to escape into a fantasy that promises her real connection. She believes she is being initiated into a magical world, which she has wanted, very badly, all her life. The episode is structured around her hope, and what is dark about the episode is not the resolution, it is the depth of the hope. The show lets us see how badly Anais wants something fantastical to be real. The show lets us see her invest in the possibility. The show lets us see her open herself up to a possibility she normally would not allow herself. The episode then takes the possibility away. The magic is not real in the way she thought. The world she was being promised does not exist. The show does not punish her for hoping. The show does not even particularly judge the people who were giving her the illusion. The show simply lets her absorb the disappointment and then lets her return to her life, and the next time we see her, she is the same Anais she has always been. But you, the viewer, are now carrying the knowledge that she briefly believed something better was available, and that the better thing was not real. That, on a quiet night, is a strange thing to have sitting in your chest. A 4-year-old, the smartest member of her household, briefly allowed to believe in magic, and then required to return to the same ordinary household she was always going to be living in. The show is too gentle to make this into a tragedy. It does not need to. The shape of the episode is its own argument. Anais wanted something. The world did not give it to her. She went back to her life anyway. That is what the show has been telling us about her since the beginning. The sorcerer just gives the pattern a single concentrated form. We turn to the question of where Elmore actually comes from, and what the show has told us, mostly through implication and a small number of explicit moments, about the origin of the town and the family at its center. The episodes called The Origins, which form a 2-part story in the show's middle stretch, are the closest thing the show ever delivers to a creation myth, and the creation myth itself is gentler and stranger than people sometimes remember. The Origins tell us how Gumball came to be a Watterson, by which the show means how he came to live in the same household as Richard, Nicole, and the eventual Anais. He was, in his earliest moments, an unhoused, almost feral creature, the kind of cat that lives on the outside of the world. Richard, in a moment that the show treats as one of his rare, genuinely good acts, brought him in. That is the version of the story the show tells. What the show tells us about Darwin is more complicated. Darwin, in the show's running history, was a goldfish, acquired as a pet by the family at an earlier stage. He grew legs. He grew arms. He grew a personality. He became a brother. The second part of The Origins, which gives us this transformation, is one of the more emotionally charged half hours the show ever made. Darwin, in this telling, is in some sense a being who was willed into personhood by the love of the family that owned him. He was not always a person. He became one because the family treated him as one. The show is openly arguing that personhood in Elmore is created by relationship, and that the boundary between pet and brother is in fact crossable in the right household with the right amount of love. That is a sweet idea. It is also a strange one. If Darwin became a brother by being loved into one, then the family is not just a family by default. They are a family by an act of imagination. They have made themselves into a household by choosing to extend its borders to include a goldfish. The show is suggesting gently that all families are like this, that the family is, on some level, an act of decision, that you can choose to love a thing into being part of you, that the household is not given, it is built. The dark version of this reading is what it implies about characters who are not loved into personhood. Rob, who we discussed earlier, was not loved into personhood. Rob was forgotten into non-personhood. The cosmic dump, where the show puts the things it does not love into being, is, by the same logic, the photographic negative of what Darwin's family did for him. Darwin became a person because he was loved. Rob became a discarded thing because he was forgotten. The same machinery that elevates one being can demote another. The household made Darwin. The dump made Rob. The same show contains both. And then there is the question that the show never quite resolves, which is the question of what is actually inside Richard's head. Richard, across the run of the show, is presented as comprehensively unintelligent, lazy, and impulsive. The vegging, as we discussed, animates the decay of his brain. The origins suggest that he was always this way. There are episodes, however, particularly in the later seasons, that flash up images of a Richard who briefly demonstrates capacities the show normally denies him. There are moments where, in extremis, he becomes lucid. There are moments where he reveals an unexpected emotional intelligence about his family. There are moments where the show seems to be suggesting that the Richard we have always seen is a performance, not a reality, and that there is, somewhere underneath, a fuller person who has chosen, for reasons the show never fully articulates, to retreat from himself. If you read the show this way, Richard is one of the most quietly tragic figures in it. He is not stupid because he is incapable. He is stupid because being stupid is easier. The show, at its kindest, lets him have these moments of brief lucidity, and then lets him fall back into the comfortable shape of the comic dad, and the family lets him, and Nicole lets him, because the alternative would require everyone to ask harder questions than anyone in this household wants to ask. The vegging on this reading is not a punishment for one bad afternoon. It is the literal animation of a long-term choice. Richard has been shrinking his own brain for years. The episode just shows us the final compression. Or perhaps that is reading too much into it. The show is generous enough to allow multiple readings of Richard. Maybe he is just simple. Maybe he is just a comic figure in a comic show. Maybe the moments of lucidity are simply the show's normal mode of contradicting itself for a joke. None of those readings are wrong. The thing about this show, the thing that has kept its fan base writing essays about it for 15 years, is that it allows them all to be available simultaneously. And you, on a tired night, can pick whichever reading hurts most, and the show will support it. There is a moment, late in the show's run, in the episode called The Disaster, that operates as the show's clearest single confession that it has been a meta artifact all along. The Disaster, in its premise, takes the meta logic of the show and gives it physical form. The Wattersons come into possession of a remote control. The remote control, it turns out, controls the universe of the show itself. With it, they can pause the show, rewind the show, fast forward through portions of the show they do not like, edit the show. They begin doing all of these things, and the show around them begins to come apart. The episode is structured as a kind of escalation of consequences. Each manipulation of the show's logic by the family produces a worse and worse degradation of the world. At first, they undo small irritations. Then they undo bigger problems. Then they attempt to undo people they did not like. The town starts to glitch. Characters who have been edited out leave gaps in the world that the rest of the show is not equipped to fill. The animation itself begins to corrupt. Backgrounds turn into raw color fields. Characters lose features. The episode is, by the end, depicting the show as a fragile, constructed thing being torn apart by the hands of the people inside it. The dark moment in The Disaster is what happens when the family tries to fast forward. They want to skip past a difficult sequence. They press fast forward. The show obligingly fast forwards, but the show fast forwards through them as well. They age, they live entire stretches of their lives. In seconds, they become old, they become older. They become the future versions of themselves, who they have only briefly glimpsed in other episodes. They live entire emotional histories in compressed form. They have arguments they did not know they were going to have. They get sick. They reconcile. They grow apart. They die. The remote control fast forwards through all of it, and they are dragged through it, helpless, watching their own lives spool past. The episode then mercifully allows them to rewind. They return to their normal ages. They return to their normal moment. The show recovers. But the damage to the viewer, in a quiet way, is permanent. We have seen what the future of the show looks like, more or less. We have seen the Wattersons die. We have seen the family end. We have, if we squint at it, seen the eventual conclusion of the entire show, in compressed accidental form, presented to us as a comic accident inside a single episode. The show has shown us the deaths of all of its characters, and then asked us to pretend we did not see. This is the kind of move that, in a regular sitcom, would be impossible. You cannot show your characters dying on screen and then walk it back without consequence. Gumball, working in the meta register, can do it, and does. And the consequence is that the rest of the show now sits, in our heads, against the background of those compressed deaths. The Wattersons we are watching in any subsequent episode are now also the Wattersons we have seen fast-forwarded through their own ends. We know how they end, more or less. The show, having told us, can no longer untell us. That is by any reasonable measure one of the strangest things a children's cartoon has ever done. It is also one of the more thoughtful. The show is admitting, in a single, elaborate gag, that its characters have lifespans, that their lifespans will end, that the comic stasis of the cartoon is a temporary arrangement, and that we are all, viewers and characters alike, being held inside a brief portion of a much longer arc that ends the way arcs end. It is a memento mori smuggled inside a Cartoon Network show. Nobody talks about it that way. It deserves to be talked about that way. There is a related episode, The Rerun, in which the characters travel within their own past. The rerun is in some ways the inverse of the disaster. Instead of seeing the future, the boys see the past. They go back into earlier episodes of the show. They see themselves as younger characters with older animation styles in plots they have already lived through. The episode is, in part, a love letter to the early seasons of the show. It also performs a quieter, more melancholy gesture. It shows us, by direct comparison, how much the boys have changed. The Gumball from the early seasons looks different. He moves differently. His voice, of course, is one of the earlier voices we discussed. The rerun does not say this out loud, but it does not have to. The viewer is invited to look at the early Gumball and the late Gumball at the same time, and to feel, in the difference, how much has happened in the years between. This is one of the most direct things the show does about its own production reality. The rerun is the show looking at itself in a mirror and naming what it sees. It has been on the air for years. The boys are not the boys they were. The animation team is not the same team it was. The voice actors, as discussed, have rotated. The world of Elmore, while pretending to be the same Elmore, is not the same Elmore. The rerun lets the viewer feel this difference, and then ends and goes back into the rolling present of the show. And the rolling present is now haunted by the past it has just been compared to. There is, also, an episode in which the show allows itself to look something like what the late period writers were probably actually thinking about. By most readings, in a brief experiment, an exhausted, frustrated, fundamentally decent woman is finally allowed to enforce her view of what the town should be, with something close to total power. The episode then watches what happens when that power is used. What happens is not, well, you might guess. There is no operatic tyranny. The flavor is suburban. Rules get enforced. Things get optimized. The town becomes safer, in some sense, and also more constricting. The freedoms that the town's chaotic charm depended on begin to disappear. The episode is making very gently an argument about what happens when the people running a place become too tired to tolerate disorder. They flatten the place into order. They lose, in the process, the parts that made the place worth running. By the end of the episode, the experiment has to be undone, because the person at the center of it has become a problem she cannot see. The dark moment in that thread is the realization that the person enforcing the rules is not really a tyrant. She is just tired. She is just someone who has been given control after years of having none, and who has used that control to make the world stop misbehaving for once. The show is sympathetic to her. The show understands her. The show also, with great gentleness, does not let her win. The town, in the show's final reading, is not better off being controlled by an exhausted mother. The town has to remain chaotic, even at the cost of being annoying, because the alternative is a kind of suburban authoritarianism that the show, in its bones, does not believe in. That is a strange thing for a children's cartoon to be working through. It is also one of the reasons that when the Inquisition finally arrived in 2019, the audience that had been paying attention recognized what it was doing. The Inquisition is a kind of inverse of that earlier experiment. Instead of an exhausted parent quietly becoming the authority, an outside figure imposes authority on the town from above. The town, this time, is not run by an exhausted parent. The town is run by an external censor. The same questions, however, are being asked. What does it cost to live in a place where the rules are enforced from above? What gets killed when the chaos is silenced? Who actually loses? If you read those two episodes together, the show is, in its quiet way, telling a single story about freedom and constraint, about who gets to set the rules of a town, and about the cost of being told to behave. The fact that the second of those episodes turned out to be the last of the show, by accident or by design, gives that single story a real weight that I do not think the show would have given it had it expected to keep going for another 5 seasons. The show ended on its most political note. That note was about the cost of being silenced. There is also, threading through the entire show, a small but important fact about the relationship between Gumball and Darwin. They are, by the show's logic, brothers. They are also in some sense more than brothers. They are best friends. They are co-conspirators. They are functional partners in every plot of the show. There is an episode in which they recognize this and try to formalize it. They make a deal that they will never abandon each other. They make a deal that they will be best friends forever. They make this deal with the kind of unguarded sincerity that only very young children can sustain. The episode is, on the surface, a comedy. The deal is taken to absurd extremes. The boys spend the entire half hour testing the limits of what they have promised. The show plays the absurdity for laughs. The thing underneath the absurdity is the recognition that the boys really mean it. They are aware, on some level, that the world will try to separate them. They are aware, on some level, that this is not the kind of thing you can fully guarantee. They make the promise anyway because they need to. The promise is the way they tell each other that they are scared of what would happen if they ever did stop being best friends. The reason that Pax sits in the dark moments conversation is what it implies about the rest of the show. The boys are not casually close. They are anxiously close. They have built the entire structure of their selves around being each other's. The show is honest about how much this matters to them, and the show is also honest about how fragile it is. There are episodes in which they fight. There are episodes in which one of them briefly threatens to leave. There are episodes in which the bond is tested, and the testing always reveals how much each of them needs the bond to hold. The pact, in some sense, is an attempt to insulate the bond against everything that might come for it. The darker reading, available if you want to take it, is that the boys have a reason to be this scared. They are growing up. They are in a household that is one bad month away from collapse. They are in a town that, as we have discussed, eats its adults. The future they are heading into is, by the show's own logic, the future of becoming a Mr. Robinson or a Larry or a Principal Brown. The pact is, on this reading, an attempt to insulate their childhood from the adulthood that is coming for them. They want to remain, as a unit, what they are right now. They are, of course, going to fail. Everyone fails at this. The show, by acknowledging that they have tried, makes the failure more affecting, in advance. There is a recurring figure in the show, Granny Jojo, who is Richard's mother, and who is a complicated piece of work even by the standards of this household. She is, in the show's earliest seasons, played as a doting grandmother. She loves the children. She loves Richard. She has a particular kind of warmth that the show treats as wholesome. Over time, the show begins to add layers. Granny Jojo is also, the show reveals, a kind of low-key controlling presence. She has opinions about how Nicole runs the household. She does not approve of certain choices. She drops in unexpectedly. She rearranges things. She is, in the way only grandmothers can be, simultaneously beloved and corrosive. The episode called The Joy, which we briefly mentioned in connection with Mr. Robinson, also involves Granny JoJo. The episode pushes the cheerful grandmother aesthetic to a particular extreme, and the extreme is not entirely comforting. The Joy ends up being about the dark side of insistent positivity, the way that demanding constant cheerfulness from the people around you is itself a kind of imposition, the way that an aggressively happy person can be just as oppressive as an aggressively unhappy one. Granny JoJo, in this reading, is not a villain. She is a force. The force has a direction. The direction is, in the episode, dangerous to be in front of. There is a related episode often called The Society, in which the elder residents of Elmore are revealed to be running, in their spare time, a kind of unofficial parallel governance of the town. They meet in secret. They have rules and rituals. They make decisions about the town that the town itself is not aware of. The show plays this as a comic premise. The thing underneath the comedy is that the older generation in Elmore has organized itself into something like a shadow authority, and that they do not consult the people they are governing. The young people of the town are, in this reading, being managed by their grandparents without their knowledge. The dark thing about that thread is that the show never really resolves it. The shadow governance is exposed within the episode and then quietly returns to the background of the show afterwards. The Wattersons do not, in any subsequent episode, dismantle it. Granny JoJo presumably is still a member. The town presumably is still being managed in some informal sense by people who never asked the town for the position. The show, having shown us that this is happening, lets it keep happening. It is, in its own way, a small political observation about who actually runs places. And the answer the show seems to land on is that it is not who you think. There is also the episode called The Slap, which is a much more direct attempt by the show to do an episode about a single specific real-world social problem. The Slap is about the way that small acts of casual everyday cruelty propagate up through a social environment. The premise, in compressed form, is that one character slaps another, and the slap then triggers a chain of reactions in which everyone in the town slaps everyone else, and the slap multiplies, and the town becomes overwhelmed by an epidemic of slapping. The episode is, on its surface, a piece of comic exaggeration. The thing underneath is the show's argument that there is no such thing as a single act of cruelty in a community. Every act of cruelty produces further acts of cruelty. The slap is a contagion. What is dark about the slap is the show's complete lack of confidence that the contagion can be stopped. The episode structurally suggests that there is no simple resolution to a system in which everyone is hurting everyone else. There is no single character who can step in and end the cycle. There is no single moral that resolves the situation. The cycle has to wear itself out, slowly, through the limited stamina of the people inside it. The show lets us see this exhaustion. It lets us see how tired everyone in the town is by the end. There is, in the final moments, no real triumph, only fatigue. That is a much heavier note than the show usually plays on. It is also, on a sleepless night, a very recognizable note. We have all been in social situations, in workplaces, in families, in towns, in countries, in which a small unkindness has become a culture. The slap is the show telling us, in a single, concentrated half hour, what it actually feels like to be inside one of those cultures. It is a small piece of social observation dressed up as a chase episode. It is also perhaps the show telling us why the Inquisition, when it eventually arrived, would not be able to be resolved within its own running time. Some problems do not have endings within the time you have for them. The slap is one. The censor is another. The Fury, an episode deeper in the run, is another of the show's more directly emotional pieces. And it deserves to be mentioned here because it is one of the rare episodes in which Nicole's anger is allowed to be the center of the plot in a way that is not played as comedy. The Fury, structurally, involves a wrong done to Nicole and her decision to pursue the people responsible. The pursuit is depicted as serious. The episode does not, in its main register, mock her. The episode lets her be terrifying. She is presented as one of the most physically capable characters in the show. Her anger, given form, is presented as something that adults should be careful about. What is interesting, and ultimately a little sad about the Fury, is what the show does with her anger by the end. The anger is resolved. The wrong is acknowledged. The episode finishes. And the next time we see Nicole, she is back to her ordinary register, her ordinary patience, her ordinary exhaustion. The moment of her being allowed to be furious is a single moment. It is not allowed to spill over into the rest of her life. She has to go back to the job and the children and the husband and the house and the bills and the rainbow factory. The anger was a vacation from being Nicole. The anger was not, by the show's own choice, allowed to become the new Nicole. The dark thing about the Fury, viewed this way, is that it is essentially a portrait of a woman briefly being allowed to be honest about how she actually feels, and then being required to put the honesty back in its box and resume the ordinary modulated public face she normally wears. The show is honest enough to let us see the boxing of the honesty. The show does not pretend that Nicole is fine after the episode. The show simply allows that she is going to act as if she is fine, because acting as if she is fine is what she has to do, because acting as if she is fine is the price of the household functioning. That is one of the saddest things the show ever did, and the show does it as a side observation in an episode that is mostly being played for action comedy. The other adults in the show, by the way, do not get even this much. Most of them are not given the kind of contained explosion that Nicole is allowed in the Fury. Most of them have to keep their anger boxed all the time. The Fury is, in this sense, an unusually generous episode of the show, even though it is a very dark one. It allows Nicole briefly to feel what she actually feels. The rest of the time she does not get to. There is a smaller character, Larry, who needs his own brief consideration here, and who I do not think is talked about enough by people who write about the show. Larry is a horned humanoid figure who appears across the run of the show in roughly the role of the local fall guy. He is a cashier. He is also a clerk. He is also a janitor. He is also a delivery man. He is also a security guard. He is also, more or less, every customer service position in the town. The running joke of the show is that anytime the family enters any business, Larry is behind the counter. The joke is funny. The thing underneath the joke is that Larry has, in the universe of the show, taken on a labor load that no real person could sustain. In one of his episodes, Larry briefly attempts to stop being Larry. He gives up his many jobs, he attempts to rest, the town begins to collapse, things stop working. Larry, it turns out, was holding up the entire local economy with his constant labor. The episode is structured as a comedy, but the comedy is built on a real observation. The labor of certain people, in certain economies, is what makes the rest of the economy function. When that labor stops, the economy reveals itself for what it is. Without Larry, the town cannot run. The town's apparent functionality was made of his exhaustion. The dark moment for Larry is when he, having tasted the possibility of rest, comes back to work, because the town needs him. He does not get to keep his vacation. He does not get to keep his peace. He returns to the counters, the registers, the deliveries. The town stabilizes. The town does not, in any subsequent episode, build a system that would mean Larry does not have to do all of this work alone. The show does not propose a structural solution. The show simply lets Larry go back to the work and lets the town go back to functioning. And the episode ends. If you read Larry as a kind of allegorical figure, what he is the local working class. The show is, in his appearances, telling a small, consistent story about the dependence of comfortable, middle-class life on the relentless labor of people whose comfort is not part of the equation. The Wattersons are not rich, as we have discussed, but they are also not Larry. They are not on the till. They are dumb when they enter the businesses on the side of the counter that gets served. Larry is on the other side. The town's apparent equilibrium is maintained by his never being allowed to rest, and the show, again, is not subtle about this. It just does not insist on the reading. There is also Sussy, who is one of the most genuinely unsettling supporting characters in the show, and who, like Carrie, is partially horror played as comedy. Sussy is a small character whose only visible feature is her chin, which is also her face, depending on how you look at her. The show plays her existence as a punchline. The thing about Sussy, the thing that makes her unsettling, is that the show is consistent about what she is, and what she is, when you watch enough of the show, becomes harder to laugh at. She has, by the show's own logic, a family, a home, a life, And she has all of these things while being a face that does not quite work as a face. She is a person. Her body, by every normal standard, is not. There is a sweetness to Susie that the show genuinely insists on. She is friendly. She is kind. She participates in the social life of the school. She is not a monster. She is just, by the show's own honest depiction, very strange. The dark moment, with Susie, is the cumulative recognition that she is a person whose body is more or less broken by the standards of the world she is in, and that the world does not seem to care, and that she has to live in her body anyway, and that she does, and that she is happy about it. That, in a different mood, would be one of the most uplifting characters in the show. Susie, by sheer force of her own equanimity, is content with being whatever it is she is. She does not seem to mind that she is a chin. The show, by treating her with affection rather than mockery, sides with her. The hard thing the show is doing, by including her, is asking the viewer to accept that this is what a person can look like and still be a person. The hard thing is not on Susie. The hard thing is on the viewer. Susie is fine. The viewer has to learn to look at her without flinching. The show, in the end, makes this fairly easy. But it is a thing the show is asking you to do all the same. There is, woven through the entire run of Gumball, a particular set of meta gestures that have led a sizable portion of the fan community to develop what is usually referred to as the simulation reading of the show. This is, properly speaking, a fan theory. It is not canon. It is not something the show ever explicitly endorses. It is, however, a theory that the show keeps quietly handing material to, and which therefore deserves to be talked about here in the Dark Moments conversation, because if you take the theory seriously, the show becomes one of the most existentially uncomfortable cartoons ever made. The simulation reading in compressed form is the fan idea that Elmore is not a real place inside the world of the show. Elmore is, instead, some kind of constructed environment, a simulation, a render, a piece of software, a video game, a cartoon that knows it is a cartoon. The exact label depends on which version of the theory you are reading, and the inhabitants of Elmore are, on some level, aware of this. Gumball, the show suggests in scattered moments, may be the only one of the inhabitants who really knows. Or maybe it is Rob. Or maybe it is all of them. The show plays coy about who the most aware character actually is, but it consistently, across the seasons, lets the viewer know that someone in the room is paying attention to the wallpaper. The evidence for the simulation reading is mostly visual and structural rather than spoken. We have already discussed the disaster, in which the family acquires a literal remote control of the universe. We have already discussed the void, in which the show acknowledges that there is a cosmic dump containing its own deleted footage. We have already discussed the finale, in which the family decides to keep being chaotic so that the show will continue to be produced. We have already discussed the rerun, in which the boys travel within their own broadcast history. Across these episodes, the show is openly acknowledging that the world is a constructed artifact. The simulation reading just takes that acknowledgement seriously and asks what it implies about everyone else inside the constructed artifact. What it implies is unsettling. If the world is constructed and the characters are aware that the world is constructed, then their reactions to anything that happens to them are also constructed reactions. And their attempts to feel real about their lives are operating against a structural awareness that the lives are not real. They are stuck inside a world they know is not entirely there. Their attempts to love each other, their attempts to grow, their attempts to learn the lessons that each episode requires them to learn, are all happening on top of this dim, persistent suspicion that none of it really matters. The cartoon will reset. The episode will end. The town will return to its baseline. The friendships will be tested and restored. Nothing will permanently change. This is, of course, true of every long-running cartoon. The reset button is the foundation of the form. Most shows do not call attention to it. Most shows want you to forget that it exists. Gumball, by contrast, keeps pointing at it. The finale points at it. The rerun points at it. The disaster points at it. And the cumulative effect of all this pointing is that the show is openly forcing the viewer to ask whether the characters really feel anything, given that the framework they live inside guarantees that nothing they feel will have any lasting consequence. The dark thing about this reading is what it implies for Gumball himself. If Gumball is, in some sense, the most aware character, then he is also the most trapped. He knows he is in a show. He knows the show will keep producing episodes. He knows that whatever he does this week will be reset by next week. He knows that his bond with Darwin, however deeply felt, is also a bond that the writers can choose to break for plot reasons at any moment. He knows that his mother's exhaustion will not actually be relieved, because relieving it would end the engine of certain stories. He is, on this reading, a small blue cat, aware that he is being watched, aware that he is being written, aware that the watching and the writing are the conditions of his continued existence. And he keeps going. He keeps being silly. He keeps loving his family. He keeps making promises to Darwin and meaning them. He keeps trying. That is, in its own way, almost beautiful. It is also, in its own way, very tired. The simulation reading is not a happy reading of the show. It is a reading that asks the viewer to recognize that everyone inside the show might be working against a constant low-level despair about their own reality, and continuing anyway because continuing is what they have. I want to be clear that this is a fan theory. The show does not make it canon. Different writers across the run may not have agreed on what the meta moments were intended to mean. The simulation reading is a way of organizing the meta gestures into a single, coherent picture, and the picture is striking, but it is not the only picture available. You can also read the meta moments as straightforward jokes about cartoon convention, without taking the next step into existential horror. The show is generous enough, as we said earlier, to accept both readings. You can have a comfortable gumball or an uncomfortable one. The show will sit next to you in either chair. There is, also, the question of what happens in episodes that the show set in the future. We mentioned in passing that the show has shown us glimpses of older versions of the characters. The earliest of these is the episode called The Kids, in which Gumball and Darwin briefly become teenagers, and discover that the transition is not flattering. The teenage versions of the boys are, almost immediately, depicted as more anxious, more depressive, more burdened, more confused than their child selves. The episode plays this as a comedy. The thing underneath is the show looking at the future and not liking what it sees. There is also a glimpse set in a distant future of the town, in which we see the grown versions of all of the children, and the grown versions are almost universally not happy. Gumball, in this future, is depicted in a way that suggests his life has not gone the direction he might have hoped. Darwin's future is similarly muted. The supporting characters' futures are sketched in quickly, and the sketches are, with a few exceptions, sad. There are characters who are alone. There are characters who are working dead-end jobs. There are characters who have not recovered from the small social disasters of their school years. The show is, in this glimpse, doing a small version of the kind of where are they now sequence that adult sitcoms sometimes do at the end of their runs, and the where are they now sequence is, by the standards of children's cartoons, fairly bleak. The show then walks the future back. The future was a hypothetical. The boys return to their present. They resolve not to let the future happen. They are, of course, going to fail at this, in the sense that the future will happen regardless of what anyone resolves. And the show, by walking back the future on screen, is also acknowledging that the walking back is part of the comforting fiction. We know what the future looks like. The boys know. The show knows. The viewer knows. The walking back is a temporary mercy. The dark moment in episodes like these is the recognition that the show is not promising its characters happiness. The show is promising its characters a current state of being children together, which is precious because it is finite, and the finitude is what makes the show what it is. Gumball and Darwin are not going to be best friends forever in the literal sense. They might be best friends forever in the sense of always being able to point at a stretch of their lives during which they were. That is a quieter, more grown-up version of what friendship actually is, and the show in its bones knows this, even when it is dressing it up as a sworn promise. The episode called The Boredom belongs in this conversation too, because it is a strange small piece of work that demonstrates the show's interest in the way that ordinary life, given enough time and not enough stimulation, can decay into something close to existential collapse. The boredom is built around the premise that the children of the show have run out of things to do. Summer has gone on too long. The novelty of having no school has worn off. The boys, having exhausted every available distraction, slip into a state of empty time that the show animates as a kind of decay. The world dulls, the colors fade, the sense of forward motion disappears. The boys in their boredom become almost incapable of acting. The episode is structured as a comedy. The thing it depicts, however, is a recognizable version of what depression can look like in a child. The lack of energy, the inability to start anything, the way that even pleasurable things stop being pleasurable, the feeling that time is a substance you are stuck inside rather than a movement you're participating in. The show, having shown us this state, eventually pulls the boys out of it. They find a thing to do. The story resumes. The colors come back. But the colors coming back does not undo the fact that the show has shown us, in a children's cartoon, what an undefended afternoon can feel like when the will to do anything has drained out of a kid. Most people would not call The Boredom one of the dark episodes. It is not gory. It is not directly upsetting. It does not involve a death or a villain. It is, however, one of the more honest depictions of what dull suffering looks like that I have seen in any cartoon aimed at children. The fact that the show went out of its way to animate it carefully is its own kind of statement. The show takes the boredom seriously enough to render it. The show wants you to feel it. The show wants you to know it is a real thing. There is also the question of the school itself, which has not been fully discussed in this essay but which deserves a slow moment. Elmore Junior High, where most of the show is set, is presented as an essentially functional institution. But the longer you watch, the more you notice that it is held together by some genuinely strange people. The principal is, as mentioned, a man who has spent his entire life inside the school. The teachers include Miss Simeon, an ancient primate who has been teaching for thousands of years by the show's own jokes about her age, and who openly dislikes the children. The school counselor, Mr. Small, is a deeply unwell man whose attempts to help the children frequently end up requiring more help than the children needed in the first place. The lunch lady is a woman whose food is, by the show's own consistent admission, dangerous to eat. The school nurse, when she appears, is usually unhelpful. The school, in short, is staffed by people who, by any reasonable standard, should not be working with children. The dark thing about this, and the reason it sits in this essay, is that the show is consistent about it. The school is not occasionally bad. The school is structurally bad. The teachers are not occasionally cruel or absent. The teachers are, in their baseline mode, indifferent to the welfare of the students. The students are not particularly safe at the school in any meaningful sense. They are simply present at it. The show plays this for comedy, and the comedy works. But the cumulative weight of all these depictions is that Gumball and Darwin and Anais are attending an institution that is failing them, and the show is making that failure into the running setting of the story rather than treating it as a problem to solve. This is again recognizable to anyone who has been to a school. Not every school, but many. The school as depicted in Gumball is not invented out of nothing. It is exaggerated from a real type. The exhausted teacher who has stopped trying. The principal who is running out the clock. The counselor whose own life is in pieces. The bad lunch. The unhelpful nurse. The show is, in its own way, doing a long sustained portrait of what an underfunded, indifferent, suburban public school can look like. And it is making it the location of the comedy. And the location of the comedy is also the location of a small, ongoing failure of an institution to do what an institution is supposed to do for children. There is a smaller, often overlooked thread in the show concerning Tobias's family, the Wilsons, who are presented as Elmore's nominal version of a wealthy, upper-middle-class household. Tobias is a rainbow-colored boy with an oversized ego, and the show's running joke is that he is an aspirational version of himself, performing wealth and confidence that his actual life does not really earn him. His sister Rachel is, for a while, one of Gumball's primary objects of affection, and her arc in the early seasons is one of the few in the show that gets quietly retired without comment. After a certain point in the run, Rachel simply stops appearing. The show does not explain her absence. Other characters do not really talk about it. She has been removed. For a long time, this was simply a production decision that fans noticed and that the show did not address. By most accounts, the real-world reason for it had to do with voice cast and certain availability issues, and it is not the kind of dramatic backstory that requires deep speculation. What is interesting, from the perspective of this essay, is that the show, in its later seasons, never invented a return for her. She is simply gone from the world of the show. The household of the Wilsons is one member short, and that absence is left unspoken. The dark version of this reading, if you want to take it, is that the show is doing what it sometimes does, and quietly demonstrating the way that adolescence ends some of the friendships of childhood. People leave, people move away, people simply stop being part of your life. The show does not need to dramatize this for it to be true. The absence of Rachel from the second half of the show is, in its own way, an honest depiction of how this kind of disappearance actually feels. You do not get a special episode about the friend who is no longer around. You just notice, one day, that you have not seen them in a while. That is the texture of how people leave. There is a similar quieter sadness around the question of certain other supporting characters. Bober, the robot child who shows up across the early seasons as a kind of inhuman friend of the boys, slowly fades from prominence as the show goes on. Banana Joe, the slightly demented yellow banana, remains, but the early intensity of his appearances softens. Sarah G. Lado is one of the strangest examples of a character who develops new dimensions during the show, eventually becoming openly a fan character. That is, a character who is aware that she lives inside a show that has fans, and who behaves accordingly. Sarah is a kind of inside joke about the show's audience, and she is also, on a quieter read, a kind of warning. She knows everything about the characters around her. She has theories about them. She has speculations. She has opinions. She is, in some sense, the viewer made into a character. The dark moment with Sarah is when the show, in certain late episodes, lets her be wrong. She has strong feelings about how stories should go. The stories do not always go the way she wants. She is forced to absorb disappointment about things she does not really control. The show is, very gently, telling its own audience something about how it feels to be a fan of a show that does not always do what you want it to do. Sarah is the audience inside the story. The audience inside the story does not get to direct the story. The audience inside the story has to live with what the story actually does. That is, in its way, a small piece of show business honesty placed inside the show itself. Mr. Small, the school counselor, is the character I have been waiting to talk about properly, because Mr. Small is, by some measure, the saddest professional adult at Elmore, and the show is not particularly gentle with him. He is a man whose job is to provide emotional support to children, and whose own emotional state is, by the show's consistent depiction, deeply unsuitable for that job. He believes in a number of ideas that the show treats as foolish. He pursues a number of lifestyles that the show treats as self-destructive. He is, in many of his episodes, on the verge of some kind of collapse. He is the counselor, but he is the one who needs counseling. The dark moment with Mr. Small is what the show implies about who is actually available to help the children of Elmore. Mr. Small is the formal support system. Mr. Small is what the institution provides. Mr. Small is also broken. The kids who come to him for help are being sent to a man who is in worse shape than they are. The show does not need to spell this out. The show simply keeps showing us episodes in which the help Mr. Small provides ends up making the situation worse, or in which his own personal crisis becomes the actual plot of the episode, with the children left to manage on their own. There is a particular reading of Mr. Small that is, in its way, very generous. He is a man who is trying. He genuinely cares. He is not malicious. He is not cynical. He is doing what he can with what he has. The show is, on this reading, not really mocking him so much as observing him. It is observing how much weight in an underfunded, indifferent school is placed on a single, broken counselor, and how little support that counselor himself receives, and how predictable the outcomes are when the entire emotional infrastructure of a school is one man who is not really equipped for the role. That is, in its way, more upsetting than a comic villain would be. A comic villain you can defeat. A comic villain by the end of the episode is gone. Mr. Small is still there. He will be there next week. He will be doing his job. He will be doing it badly. The kids will keep coming to him. The school will keep paying him. The system will continue. The show is, with Mr. Small, depicting a particular kind of stuck adult professional in a particular kind of failing system. And it is doing this every time it includes him. And it is asking the viewer, without ever insisting on the question, to notice what they are looking at. There is also the briefly tragic figure of Penny's father, Patrick Fitzgerald, who deserves more discussion in this essay than he usually gets. We have already mentioned that the Shell episode reveals he has been the principal architect of Penny's lifelong self-repression. The Shell was, by the show's consistent depiction, something he insisted on. He believed, on some level, that Penny had to be hidden. He has spent years enforcing this belief on his daughter. The episode that finally airs his perspective gives him a kind of partial redemption arc, in which he is forced to confront the harm he has done to Penny, and to recognize that he has been wrong and to allow her to be what she actually is. The dark moment, with Patrick, is what the redemption does and does not undo. He has spent years insisting that his daughter wear a shell. He has, in the process, shaped her relationship to her own body. He has shaped her relationship to her own emotions. He has shaped her relationship to the world. A few episodes of redemption do not undo all of that. The show does not pretend that they do. Penny continues, after the redemption, to have a complicated relationship with the shell. She continues to be a girl who has to think about whether to put it on or take it off, and whose choices on this question are, on some level, an ongoing negotiation with the years her father spent telling her that the shell was who she was supposed to be. The show is, on this point, more honest than most adult dramas would be. Most stories about a parent realizing they have been wrong about their child end with the realization. The child is then free. The story moves on. Gumball does not do this. Gumball keeps the consequences of the parent's wrongness inside the child afterwards. Penny is freer after the Shell episode than she was before, but she is not entirely free, because nobody whose childhood was shaped by a parent's fear is entirely free. The show very quietly knows this. It is one of the more grown-up, emotional observations the show ever makes, and it makes it about a peanut-shaped, antlered girl who can turn into a dragon. There is a similarly quiet melancholy around Darwin's earliest history, which is touched on across the run but never fully unfolded. Darwin, as we have discussed, was originally a goldfish. The show does not entirely resolve the question of what was inside him. During the years he was a fish, did he have a personhood that nobody noticed? Did he develop personhood through being loved by the family? Or did he develop it on his own, alone, in a fishbowl, watching the Wattersons live their lives, slowly accumulating the capacity to participate? The show is, on this point, mostly content to gesture. There are flashes. There are jokes. There are episodes that suggest that Darwin spent a long time in the bowl before becoming what he is. The dark version of Darwin's backstory is, if you really want to look at it, the version in which he was a person in a bowl for years before the family noticed, in which he had thoughts, in which he watched, in which he wanted to be part of what he was watching, and could not be, in which the transformation, when it eventually came, was less an act of love and more an act of the inside food of him finally breaking through. That reading is not strictly canonical. It is available. The show, as ever, leaves the door open. If you want a much darker single episode to chew on, there is the episode called The Friend, in which Anais creates an imaginary friend who turns into a real entity. And the entity turns out to be malevolent, and the entity is, in the end, banished. The Friend is one of the more openly horror-inflected episodes the show ever made, and the imagery is, in places, genuinely unsettling for a children's cartoon. The thing the episode is doing, however, that elevates it above a straightforward horror beat, is what it implies about Anais. She needed a friend so badly that she invented one. The invention took on a life of its own. The life it took on was warped by the loneliness that produced it. The friend, when it turned monstrous, was made of the same material that Anais's own loneliness was made of. That is a real reading of the episode. The monster Anais invented is, in some sense, the shape of her own isolation given form. The fact that the monster has to be banished is a function of the fact that Anais cannot live with the externalized version of her loneliness any more than she can live with the internal one. The episode lets her win. In the end, the monster is defeated. The loneliness, however, remains. Anais is still alone in the household. The episode does not solve that. The monster was a symptom. The disease is still here. This is, I think, the move that Gumball makes more often than people give it credit for. The show keeps producing horror beats whose actual content is the inner life of a character we have not been paying enough attention to. The figure in the nightmare is the inner life of overworked children. The corrupted footage in the disaster is the inner life of a family that is afraid of its own collapse. The void where Rob lives is the inner life of every background character who knows they have been overlooked. The dragons that Penny becomes are the inner life of every child who has been told to keep her real self hidden. The horror is not coming from outside. The horror is being externalized from inside. The show is, in this sense, one of the most psychologically literate cartoons of its era, and the literacy is built into the imagery. There is a strangely specific small dark thread in the show that runs through the entire run, and that I want to spend a moment on, because it is one of those things you do not notice on a first watch and then cannot stop noticing on a third. The show repeatedly, almost compulsively, returns to the image of food that is not safe to eat. The lunch lady's food is unsafe. The fast food in the town is, in many of its appearances, unsafe. The food the family makes at home, in episodes where the food becomes a plot, is frequently weaponized by accident. There is a particular running gag involving turkey that the show keeps returning to in increasingly unsettling forms, eventually culminating in an episode in which the turkey itself becomes a kind of horror figure. There is a recurring joke about Larry's responsibility for the maintenance of food preparation systems across the town, which never quite reaches a happy conclusion. The cumulative effect of all of this is that the town of Elmore is, very quietly, presented as a place where food is not really to be trusted. The institutional food, in particular, is presented as a small ongoing danger that nobody addresses. The school keeps serving the unsafe lunch. The kids keep eating it. Nobody fixes the system. The show keeps using this as the location of its food jokes, and the food jokes keep landing, because the underlying fact of an institutionally indifferent food supply is real enough to be recognizable. That is, on a sleepless night, a strange thing to find inside a children's cartoon. It is also, on a longer view, one of the most consistent ways the show has of communicating its quiet thesis about Elmore. The institutions of the town are, in their fundamental operation, failing to do the basic things they exist to do. The school is failing to educate safely. The food service is failing to feed safely. The bank, as we have discussed, has more or less written off the Wattersons. The job market, as we have discussed in connection with Larry, runs on the exhaustion of a single person. The town's basic systems are, on examination, not really working, and the people inside the town are coping by treating the failures as the natural background of life. They are not. They are choices that someone made. The show, by making them the background of its comedy, is asking the viewer to recognize that they are choices. There is also the question of what happens when the show ventures outside Elmore. There are a small number of episodes in which the family leaves the town for various reasons. There are road trips. There are vacations. There are forced excursions. In every case, the world outside Elmore turns out to be either roughly the same as Elmore, or, more often, slightly worse. The other towns are run down. The roadside attractions are unsettling. The campsites have something wrong with them. The show does not, in any of these episodes, depict an outside world that is more sane, or more functional, or more safe than the world the family normally lives in. Elmore, by comparison with the alternatives, is treated as adequate. That is, in its way, one of the bleakest meta-observations the show ever makes. The town the family lives in is, on examination, broken in 1,000 small specific ways. The outside world is, on examination, broken in roughly the same ways. There is no escape. The family cannot move. The family cannot relocate to a town that is better, because better towns, in the world of the show, do not exist. The show is, on this point, not really making a political argument. It is making a sad one. The kind of failures that Elmore exhibits are, the show is suggesting, the failures of the kind of place Elmore is, and the world is full of places like Elmore, and there is nowhere meaningfully different available. This is, in a sense, the engine of the show's particular kind of comedy. The family laughs because they have to. The family stays in the town because there is nowhere else to be. The family makes the best of a system that is not working, because the alternative is to acknowledge that the system is not working. And there is no version of acknowledgement that produces a better system. So they laugh. They keep going. They have the small disasters that constitute the plots of the show. They have the small triumphs that allow the episodes to resolve. They make promises to each other. They put the shell on and take it off. They sit in the supermarket and refuse to leave. They wait for the cycle to wear itself out. There is finally the question of what the show was actually trying to do with all of this. Ben Bockley, the show's creator, has spoken in interviews about the origins of the show. And the origins are, themselves, a kind of strange story. The show was, in its early development, an attempt to use a number of characters that he had been developing in different commercial contexts and that he was being asked by Cartoon Network to combine into a single project. The premise of the show, the mismatched family of mismatched animation styles in a single small town, came in part from this directive. The aesthetic of mixed media, of photographs cut against drawings, of three-dimensional models against two-dimensional backgrounds, came from the fact that the characters did not originally belong together. That is a piece of production trivia. It is also, on reflection, a deep argument about what the show actually is. The show is built, from its first frame, on the recognition that the things inside it do not belong together. The cat does not match the goldfish. The goldfish does not match the rabbit. The rabbit does not match the photographic backgrounds. The photographic backgrounds do not match the claymation supporting characters. Nothing in the show really matches anything else. The show is, in its design, an admission that the people inside the show were not made for the same world. They are here together anyway. They are making it work anyway. They are loving each other anyway, across the gaps that should make them unable to love each other. The show is, in its bones, an argument that a family can be made out of people who do not match. If you read it this way, the dark moments of the show are not departures from what the show is. They are deepenings of what the show is. The Wattersons are a household held together against the structural fact of their incompatibility. Elmore is a town held together against the structural fact of its dysfunction. The school is an institution held together against the structural fact of its failure. The friendships are held together against the structural fact that the world will eventually pull them apart. Everything in the show is held together against something. The comedy is what the holding feels like when it is working. The dark moments are what the holding feels like when the strain becomes visible. That, in the end, is the kind of show Gumball was. It was not a comedy that occasionally got serious. It was a comedy whose seriousness was the substrate of its comedy. It could be very, very funny. And the funniness was the surface of a much sadder argument about the actual texture of family life in a small American suburb that does not really work. The funniness was the way the show stayed bearable. The argument was the reason the show was worth making. I want, before we close, to acknowledge a few things the show did about real-world subjects, because in the context of an essay about its dark moments, they deserve to be mentioned. The show, across its run, did episodes that, gently, addressed real questions about culture, race, gender, sexuality, class, and disability. It did them in the show's usual mode, which is to say obliquely, through metaphors, often using the differences between its characters as a way of talking about real differences in the world. The show was not always equally graceful about this, and there are episodes from the early seasons that fans have, in subsequent years, written more critically about. There are jokes that did not age well. There are reads that, in retrospect, the show might have done differently. The show was also, in its later seasons, capable of real generosity on some of these questions. There are episodes that handle anxiety with a kind of patience that adult shows would envy. There are episodes that handle disability with a real respect. There are episodes that handle difference, broadly conceived, with a kind of warmth that suggests the writer's room was paying attention to who was watching the show. The show was not perfect on these questions. The show was, however, trying. The trying counts. The trying is part of why the show is remembered as fondly as it is. Some of the darkest moments of the show, on this front, are the moments in which the show, having brought up a real social question, lets the question stand unresolved rather than offering a false resolution. The school, as discussed, is failing the children. The town, as discussed, is failing the adults. The institutions, as discussed, are not really working. The show does not fix these things in the final episode. The show does not announce at the end of the run that Elmore has decided to do better. The show simply leaves the children and the town and the institutions in the state they have been in throughout. The unresolved ending is, on this reading, not an accident of the cancellation. It is part of the show's honesty. There are things you do not get to resolve. The show is brave enough to admit that. There is also the cumulative recognition that the show and its overall arc never really gives Gumball and Darwin a happy ending in the conventional sense. They do not graduate. They do not get the girl in the conclusive sense. They do not move on to a better life. They are, when the show ends, in the same school, the same house, the same town, with the same family, with the same friends. The show ends structurally with them still inside the situation that the show has spent 6 seasons being about. There is no escape narrative. There is no climb to a higher state. There is just the continuation, until the continuation stops. That, I think, is one of the most honest things the show ever did, even though it was probably forced on it by the circumstances of the cancellation. Real life does not end with graduation. Real life does not end with the move. Real life continues day after day in the same approximate setting, with the same approximate people, with the same approximate problems. And the question of whether your life is going well is not really a question about your circumstances changing. It is a question about how you are inhabiting the unchanging fact of being where you are. Gumball and Darwin, at the end of the show, are still in Elmore. They are still in school. They are still brothers. The unanswered question they leave behind is whether they will be alright. The show, by ending where it ends, lets the question stay open. There is one more cluster of moments I want to spend time with before we begin to close, because they are some of the harder ones to talk about, and they are the ones that fans on a quiet night tend to bring up when they are talking about why the show, despite being a comedy, makes them feel things that a comedy is not really supposed to make them feel. These are the moments that involve the show looking directly at its own characters and acknowledging that the characters are not going to be alright. There is a scene, late in one of the later seasons, in which Nicole and Richard, alone, after the children have gone to sleep, talk to each other quietly about what they have made of their lives. The show does not make a big deal of the scene. It is folded into the middle of an episode that is mostly about something else. The conversation is brief, the conversation is honest. Nicole acknowledges that her life is not what she expected it to be. Richard acknowledges that he has not been the partner she deserves. They do not, in the conversation, resolve any of this. They simply sit with it. They acknowledge it. They go to bed. The next episode, they are back to their normal mode. The honesty, like the honesty of the Fury, is allowed to exist for a single contained moment, and then it is put away. That kind of scene, in the kind of show Gumball ostensibly is almost shocking. It is the kind of scene a prestige drama would build an entire arc around. The show gives it a single moment and then moves on. The show is, in effect, telling the viewer that the honesty is real, and that the moving on is also real, and that both can be true at the same time, and that the moving on is not a denial of the honesty. It is what you do with the honesty when you cannot afford to dwell on it. Nicole and Richard cannot afford to dwell. The children are upstairs. The bills are due. The day starts again in 8 hours. The honesty is a quick visit, then back to work. There is also a scene in which Anais, alone, gives up on something she had been hoping for. The episode is not specifically marketed as an Anais episode. The scene happens almost in passing. Anais has wanted something. The thing has not come. She accepts the not coming. She continues. There is no big dramatic resolution. There is no triumphant fight back. There is just a small girl, alone in her room, processing the fact that the world is not going to give her what she wanted, and deciding that she will be alright anyway. The show, for that moment, lets her be alone. The show does not interrupt her with a sibling. The show does not lighten the mood with a joke. The show simply lets her sit in the small private moment of having her hopes adjusted downward. That is, again, a scene I would expect to find in a show pitched at adults rather than in a Cartoon Network comedy. It is also the kind of scene that, on a quiet night, you remember more vividly than any of the loud jokes. The show has many loud jokes. The loud jokes are good. The loud jokes are why most of the audience came in the first place. But the show is held together by the quiet scenes. The quiet scenes are why people who watch the show as children still talk about it when they are adults. There is, finally, the question of what the show was actually saying to the children who were watching it. The show was, for years, broadcast to an audience that was, to a large extent, the same age as Gumball and Darwin. Those children saw this material. They saw the void. They saw the slap epidemic. They saw the shrinking brain. They saw Mr. Robinson's marriage. They saw Nicole's exhaustion. They saw Penny's shell. They saw the dragon she became. They saw Carrie, the dead girl in their class. They saw the dump where forgotten characters go. They saw the cliffhanger of the censor who could not be stopped. They saw, episode after episode, a depiction of the kind of world they were going to grow up into, gently masked by the comedy of a chaotic family living in a town that did not really work. It is hard to know what to do with that. As an observation about the show, it is not necessarily a bad thing. Children have always been told stories about the world they are going to grow into. The folk tales we tell children have always been full of dark material. The cartoons of previous generations have always smuggled in observations about the realities of adult life. Gumball, by these standards, is not doing anything categorically new. It is, however, doing it with a particular kind of patience and a particular kind of honesty and a particular kind of formal sophistication. And the cumulative effect of all of that patience and honesty and sophistication applied to the comic premise of a chaotic family in a small town is one of the more memorable bodies of children's television of the last 2 decades. The dark moments of the show are not, on this view, a separate category of moments. They are the underside of every moment. The moments that fans remember as joyful are the same moments that the dark reading makes painful. The pact is a beautiful promise and a doomed one. The shell coming off is a triumph and a partial one. The supermarket coupon is a victory and a defeat. The household is loving and impoverished. The town is warm and broken. The show, taken in full, is happy and sad at the same time. And the trick of watching it on the kind of night you would put on a sleep narration video about it is that you can choose, depending on your mood, which of the 2 registers you want to hear most clearly. If you want to feel comforted, the show will comfort you. The Wattersons will be okay. The boys will be best friends. The mother will be tired but loving. The father will be ridiculous but warm. The town will be strange but home. The episodes will resolve. The credits will roll. You can go to bed. If you want to feel the other thing, the show will let you. The Wattersons are barely keeping it together. The boys know on some level that they are inside a show that will eventually end. The mother is being slowly worn down by a life she did not really choose. The father is a man who has retreated from himself. The town is failing the people inside it in 100 small unaddressed ways. The episodes resolve, but the resolution is local and temporary. The credits roll, but the credits are also, in some episodes, used by the show to make its strangest meta jokes. And the jokes are jokes about the structural fragility of the entire thing. You can go to bed, but you will be carrying it. Most viewers, most of the time, get to choose which of these 2 registers they hear. The reason this essay exists, the reason the channel name is Cortoon, and we are spending 2 hours on a show that other people will only spend 20 minutes on, is to allow you, on a quiet night, to listen to both registers at once. The show was always doing both at once. The fan culture around the show has tended to focus on the bright register, because the bright register is what makes the show a beloved comedy. The dark register, the one we have been walking through tonight, is what makes the show one of the few comedies of its era that adults still find genuinely interesting to talk about. And that is, I think, the actual reason the show is going to outlast most of the cartoons it shared a network with. It is a show that took the children watching it seriously. It is a show that took the adults inside it seriously. It is a show that took the question of what a small American town actually is seriously. It is a show that took its own status as a constructed artifact seriously. It did all of this while also being, by any reasonable measure, one of the funniest cartoons of its decade. The combination is rare. The combination is why people are still writing essays about it years after the cancellation, with no certainty about what the announced continuation will look like. There is a small handful of remaining moments that I do not want to let go past without naming, because they belong in any honest list of the show's darker corners, and I think they would surprise some viewers who have only ever watched the show casually. There is, for instance, the running joke about the daily news reporters, the pair of background news characters who appear across multiple episodes, often delivering bulletins about the Wattersons' latest disaster. They are, at first, simply a piece of scenery. They are the local news team. They are mostly funny. The show, over time, slowly develops them into something stranger. There are moments in which their professional cheerfulness collides with bulletins they are required to deliver about events that should not be cheerful. There are moments in which their on-screen relationship is tested by the absurdity of the events they are required to narrate. There are moments in which their personal lives, glimpsed briefly, suggest that the professional cheerfulness is, like Mr. Robinson's professional persona, a public face that is concealing a private state. The dark thing about the news reporters is that the show, by including them, is openly making a point about the way media reports on disasters. The disasters, in the world of Elmore, are not really treated as disasters. They are treated as content. They are reported with the same chirpy efficiency as a weather update. The viewer is supposed to find this funny. The viewer also, on reflection, recognizes that this is how a lot of local news in the real world actually feels. The show is, in a quiet way, making fun of an entire genre of small market journalism, and the joke is layered on top of a real observation about the way certain kinds of suffering get flattened into something easier to consume. There is also the small running thread involving cars and the way the family treats them. The Watterson's car is a recurring joke. The car is destroyed in many episodes. The car is restored. The car is destroyed again. The car is, on a more careful read, a symbol of the family's economic precarity. They are one car breakdown away from a real crisis. The show treats this as comedy. The crisis is averted, every time, by some kind of plot mechanism. The crisis would not be averted in the real world. The car, like the house, like the budget, like Nicole's patience, is a piece of infrastructure that is being held together against the structural pressure of being held together. The destruction and restoration of the car across the show's run is a kind of low-key meditation on what economic survival actually feels like for a family on the edge. There is, also, the briefly mentioned but never quite addressed question of what Richard does with his days. We have discussed that he is unemployed. We have discussed that he is not particularly capable. What the show only occasionally surfaces is the question of what he is, in fact, doing with all of the hours he is not working. The implicit answer, across the run of the show, seems to be that he is doing very little. He is eating. He is watching television. He is occasionally embarking on small, misguided projects. The show plays this as comic. The thing underneath is that this is what a certain kind of stalled adulthood actually looks like, day after day, without any of the redemption arcs that drama television uses to make stalled adulthood feel meaningful. Richard is stalled. The show does not, by the end, restart him. There is one more thing, before we let the dark moments rest, and that is the matter of how the show treats time. The show is, formally speaking, mostly committed to the cartoon stasis convention that we discussed in connection with the simulation reading. The boys do not really age. The seasons do not really pass in any consistent way. Christmas comes around with a kind of dreamlike inconsistency. Birthdays happen without making the characters older. The school year does not really end. The boys are perpetually somewhere in early adolescence, and have been since the show began. What is dark about this, on a careful read, is that the show is openly aware of the stasis and treats it occasionally as a kind of horror. The episode that touches this most clearly is the one called The Sweaters, in which a clothing item begins to control the people wearing it, and the controlling involves a small but specific form of temporal stasis. The wearers, while wearing the sweater, are arrested in a particular emotional moment, repeating it endlessly, unable to move on. The episode is, on its surface, a comedy about a fashion item. The thing underneath is a small fable about being stuck in a moment of your own life. The sweater wearer cannot move on. The cartoon character, structurally, cannot move on. The viewer watching the show is being asked to recognize the parallel. There is, in this same family of episodes, the small recurring observation that the show makes about the way that the characters are, in some sense, repeating themselves across the seasons. The Wattersons' fights are recognizably the same fights year after year. Their reconciliations are recognizably the same reconciliations. Their small triumphs are recognizably the same small triumphs. The show, in its meta moods, is willing to call attention to this. The dark version of the meta call-out is that the family is, on some level, in a kind of loop, and the loop is what the show is, and they cannot leave it. They are not, in the simulation reading, even pretending that they can. That is, perhaps, the deepest single source of the show's particular sadness. Not any one scene, not any one episode, The cumulative fact that the show is depicting a family who cannot really get anywhere, and is asking the viewer to love them anyway, and is mostly succeeding. The love does not require escape. The love is the substance of being stuck together. The Wattersons are not going to graduate from being the Wattersons. The town is not going to graduate from being Elmore. The cartoon is not going to graduate from being the cartoon. And the show, by ending where it ends, with the cliffhanger that may or may not eventually be resolved, leaves all of this suspended. The loop is still spinning. The household is still held together. The characters are still themselves. The viewer is still watching. The show is somewhere still on, in reruns, in clips, in the parts of the internet that have preserved it, and it will, in some sense, keep going as long as anyone keeps watching it. There is also a quieter kind of dark that runs through the smaller incidental episodes. The ones that do not get clipped. The ones that do not get talked about online. The ones that fans tend to skip on rewatch. The show, across 6 seasons, made many of these. The kind of episode where Gumball and Darwin try to do a small thing, and the small thing escalates into a slightly bigger thing, and then resolves itself with some minor emotional adjustment. These episodes are, in a sense, the connective tissue of the show. They are not the bangers. They are not the masterpieces. They are the ordinary middle of the run, where the show is just doing the job of being itself. The thing about those episodes, when you watch enough of them, is that they accumulate a kind of weight that is hard to describe. The boys try a small scheme. The scheme falls apart. The boys learn a small lesson. The episode ends. The next episode, the lesson is forgotten. The boys try another small scheme. The scheme falls apart in a different way. The boys learn a different small lesson. Across hundreds of these episodes, the boys do not really change. The lessons do not really stick. The town does not really shift. The household does not really progress. The show is, in this register, a kind of long, quiet observation about the way that small lessons do not, in fact, accumulate into character growth in the way that drama teaches us to expect. You learn the lesson. You forget the lesson. You learn it again. The lessons of childhood are not, in the show's depiction, a staircase that the child is climbing. They are a small set of recurring shapes that the child keeps bumping into. The shapes are familiar. The bumping is familiar. The bumping does not really teach anyone anything they did not already half know. The show, in its quietest and most repetitive moments, is making this observation, and the observation is, I think, true to the actual experience of childhood. You do not really get smarter week by week. You just get older. That is a strange thing to find inside a children's cartoon, because children's cartoons are usually built on the premise that the lesson of the week is going to land, that the child watching is going to absorb it, that the absorption is going to shape who they become. Gumball is, in its bones, skeptical of that premise. The lesson lands and rolls off. The next lesson lands and rolls off. The character keeps being the character. The show keeps being the show. The viewer, at the end of 6 seasons, has not been promised that Gumball became a better person. The viewer has been allowed to spend a long time with him, in his particular kind of unreformable specificity, and the time has been the reward, not the reform. If you want one final small dark observation to take into the outro with us, it is this. The show is not promising anyone change. The show is offering company. The boys are still themselves. The household is still itself. The town is still itself. Nothing is meaningfully different at the end of the show than it was at the beginning. The friendship is the same friendship. The marriage is the same marriage. The school is the same school. The economic precarity is the same economic precarity. The aliveness is the aliveness of having been with these people for a long time, not the aliveness of having watched them become anything new. That, on a long quiet night, is more than enough. We do not always need our stories to promise us transformation. We sometimes just need them to sit with us while we are tired, while we are unsure, while we are not transforming either. The show, in that mode, is one of the kindest pieces of company a person can keep. The cost of the kindness is that the kindness is honest. The show is willing to admit that the things that are wrong with the world are wrong, and that they will probably stay wrong, and that the way through them is to be with the people who are in them with you. That is the dark moment of the show, in its most condensed form, and it is also the bright one, and on a different night you would describe the same observation in a different mood, and that is the kind of show this is. So we begin to close. The Amazing World of Gumball aired its first episode in 2011 and its last full episode in 2019. And across that span, it accumulated a body of work that looked at carefully as one of the more thoughtful runs of children's television that any network produced in that decade. It was a comedy. It was very funny. It was also, as we have spent these hours establishing, a quietly serious meditation on a small American town, on the family at the center of it, on the institutions that hold the town together when they hold and that fail the town when they fail, on the children growing up inside the town who do not really get to choose the conditions of their growing up, and on the adults around them who are doing what they can with what they have in a world that is not entirely cooperating with their efforts. It was a show that was generous to its characters even when the world inside the show was not. It was a show that was willing to sit with sadness for the length of a small scene, and willing to let the sadness be unresolved by the end of the episode. It was a show that, in its meta moments, openly acknowledged its own constructedness, and in doing so raised the kinds of questions about reality that children's cartoons very rarely raise. It was a show that took its viewers seriously, regardless of the age of the viewer, and gave them material that they could keep coming back to as they got older, and that would, on each return, reveal a slightly different layer than it had revealed on the previous visit. It was also, in the end, a show that did not get the conclusion it might have wanted. The ending with the Inquisition was not designed to be the ending. The cliffhanger was not designed to be the last image. The continuation that has been announced has not yet, as of the moment this script is being written, fully arrived in any released form that I would describe as confirmed canon. The show is in a kind of suspended state. The cliffhanger is still cliffhanging, the town is still being threatened by the censor, the rebellion is still being held in the air. We do not yet know how it ends, we may yet find out. Or we may in the end simply be left with the suspension, and the suspension may itself become the ending, the way the things we did not finish in our own lives become, in the end, the shapes our lives ended up taking. That, I think, is a fitting place to leave the show, and a fitting place to leave us. The Amazing World of Gumball will keep being what it has been. The dark moments will keep being there, under the bright moments, available to anyone who watches carefully. The bright moments will keep being there, over the dark moments, available to anyone who needs them. The town will keep being Elmore. The household will keep being the Wattersons. The boys will keep being best friends. The mother will keep being tired. The father will keep being himself. And on quiet nights, when there is nothing else to listen to and nothing else to do, the show will keep being available to be sat with, in whichever mood you bring to it, and that is, I think, one of the more valuable things a piece of children's television can become. In the long years after it has finished airing, thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I hope the company has been useful. I hope, more than anything, that you are by now feeling tired enough to let the day go. The Amazing World of Gumball, for all of its quiet sadness, was a show that loved the world it depicted. It loved the cat, and the goldfish, and the small smart sister, and the tired mother, and the foolish father, and the strange neighbors, and the failing school, and the impossible town. It loved them in the way that a careful, long-running piece of work loves the people inside it, by refusing to pretend they are easier or simpler or happier than they really are. That is the love that survives. That is the love that this kind of television can sometimes manage. That, I think, is the reason we keep returning to it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.